Section 23. The Prison Memoirs of an Anarchist. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Prison Memoirs of an Anarchist by Alexander Berkman, Part 2, Chapter 16, The Warden's Threat. 1. The dying sun grows pale with haze and fog. Slowly the dark grey line undulates across the shop and draws its sinuous length along the gloaming yard. The shadowy waves cleave the thickening mist, vibrate ghost-like, and are swallowed in the yawning blackness of the cell-house. "Alec! Alec!" I hear an excited whisper behind me. "Quick, plant it! The screw's going to frisk me!" Something small and hard is thrust into my coat pocket. The guard in front stops short, suspiciously scanning the passing men. "Break ranks!" The overseer approaches me. "You are wanted in the office, Burke." The warden, blear-eyed and sallow, frowns as I am led in. "What have you got on you?" he demands abruptly. "I don't understand you." "Yes, you do. Have you money on you?" "I have not." "Who sends clandestine mail for you?" "What mail?" "The letter published in the Anarchist sheet in New York." I feel greatly relieved. The letter in question passed through official channels. "It went through the chaplain's hands," I reply boldly. "It isn't true. Such a letter could never pass, Mr. Milligan. Mr. Cosson," he turns to the guard, "fetch the newspaper from my desk." The warden's hands tremble as he points to the marked item. "Here it is. You talk of revolution and comrades and anarchism. Mr. Milligan never saw that, I'm sure. It's a nice thing for the papers to say you are editing, from the prison, mind you, editing an anarchist sheet in New York." "You can't believe everything the papers say," I protest. This time the papers, they may be right," the deputy interposes. "They surely didn't make the story, out of whole cloth." "They often do," I retort. "Didn't they write that I tried to jump over the wall? It's about 30 feet high, and that the guard shot me in the leg?" A smile flits across the warden's face. Impulsively I blurt out, "Was the story inspired, perhaps?" "Silence!" the warden thunders. "You're not to speak unless addressed, remember. Mr. McPain, please search him." The long bony fingers slowly creep over my neck and shoulders, down my arms and body, pressing in my armpits, gripping my legs, covering every spot, and immersing me in an atmosphere of clamminess. The loathsome touch sickens me, but I rejoice in the thought of my security. I have nothing incriminating about me. Suddenly the snake-like hand dips into my coat pocket. What's this?" He unwraps a small round object. "A knife, Captain." "Let me see," I cry in amazement. "Stand back," the warden commands. "This knife has been stolen from the shoe shop. On whom did you mean to use it?" "Warden, I didn't even know I had it. A fellow dropped it into my pocket as we—" "That'll do. You're not so clever as you think." "It's a conspiracy," I cry. He lounges calmly in the armchair, a peculiar smile dancing in his eyes. "Well, what have you got to say? It's a put-up job." "Explain yourself." "Someone threw this thing into my pocket as we were coming—" "Oh, no, we've already heard that. It's too fishy." "You searched me for money and secret letters?" "That will do now. Mr. McPain, what is the sentence for the possession of a dangerous weapon?" "Warden," I interrupt, "it's no weapon. The blade is only half an inch, and—" "Silence! I spoke to Mr. McPain." 3 days, Captain." "Take him down." In the storeroom I am stripped of my suit of dark grey and again clad in the hateful stripes. Coatless and shoeless I am led through hallways and corridors, down a steep flight of stairs, and thrown into the dungeon. Total darkness. The blackness is massive, palpable. I feel its hand upon my head, my face. I dare not move, lest a misstep thrust me into the abyss. I hold my hand close to my eyes. I feel the touch of my lashes upon it, but I cannot see its outline. Motionless I stand on one spot, devoid of all sense of direction. The silence is sinister. It seems to me I can hear it. Only now and then the hasty scrambling of nimble feet suddenly rends the stillness, and the gnawing of invisible river rats haunts the fearful solitude. Slowly the blackness pales. It ebbs and melts. Out of the sombre grey a wall looms above. The silhouette of a door rises dimly before me, sloping upward and growing compact and impenetrable. The hours drag in unbroken sameness. Not a sound reaches me from the cell-house. In the maddening quiet and darkness I am bereft of all consciousness of time, save once a day, when the heavy rattle of keys apprises me of the morning. The dungeon is unlocked, and the silent guards hand me a slice of bread and a cup of water. The double doors fall heavily to, the steps grow fainter and die in the distance, and all is dark again in the dungeon. The numbness of death steals upon my soul. The floor is cold and clammy, the gnawing grows louder and nearer, and I am filled with dread lest the starving rats attack my bare feet. I snatch a few unconscious moments leaning against the door, and then again I pace the cell, striving to keep awake, wondering whether it be night or day, yearning for the sound of a human voice. Utterly forsaken, cast into the stony bowels of the underground, the world of man receding, leaving no trace behind. Eagerly I strain my ear, only the ceaseless, fearful gnawing. I clutch the bars in desperation. A hollow echo mocks the clanking iron. My hands tear violently at the door. "Ho there! Anyone here?" All is silent. Nameless terrors quiver in my mind, weaving nightmares of mortal dread and despair. Fear shapes convulsive thoughts. They rage in wild tempest, then calm, and again rush through time and space in a rapid succession of strangely familiar scenes wakened in my slumbering consciousness. Exhausted and weary, I droop against the wall. A slimy creeping on my face startles me in horror, and again I pace the cell. I feel cold and hungry. Am I forgotten? 3 days must have passed, and more. Have they forgotten me? The clank of keys sends a thrill of joy to my heart. My tomb will open. Oh, to see the light and breathe the air again. "Officer, isn't my time up yet?" "What's your hurry? You've only been here 1 day." The doors fall to. Ravenously I devour the bread, so small and thin, just a bite. Only 1 day. Despair enfolds me like a pall. Faint with anguish, I sink to the floor. 2. The change from the dungeon to the ordinary cell is a veritable transformation. The sight of the human form fills me with delight. The sound of voices is sweet music. I feel as if I had been torn from the grip of death when all hope had fled me, caught on the very brink, as it were, and restored to the world of the living. How bright the sun, how balmy the air! In keen sensuousness I stretch out on the bed. The tick is soiled, the straw protrudes in places, but it is luxury to rest, secure from the vicious river rats and the fierce vermin. It is almost liberty, freedom. But in the morning I awake in great agony. My eyes throb with pain. Every joint of my body is on the rack. The blankets had been removed from the dungeon. 3 days and nights I lay on the bare stone. It was unnecessarily cruel to deprive me of my spectacles in pretended anxiety lest I commit suicide with them. It is very touching, this solicitude for my safety in view of the flimsy pretext to punish me. Some hidden motive must be actuating the warden, but what can it be? Probably they will not keep me long in the cell. When I am returned to work, I shall learn the truth. The days pass in vain expectation. The continuous confinement is becoming distressing. I miss the little comforts I have lost by the removal to the single cell, considerably smaller than my previous quarters. My library, also, has disappeared, and the pictures I had so patiently collected for the decoration of the walls. The cell is bare and cheerless, the large card of ugly printed rules affording no relief from the irritating whitewash. The narrow space makes exercise difficult. The necessity of turning at every second and third step transforms walking into a series of contortions. But some means must be devised to while away the time. I pace the floor, counting the seconds required to make 10 turns. I recollect having heard that 5 miles constitutes a healthy day's walk. At that rate I should make 3,771 turns, the cell measuring 7 feet in length. I divide the exercise into 3 parts, adding a few extra laps to make sure of 5 miles. Carefully I count, and am overcome by a sense of calamity when the peal of the gong confuses my numbers. I must begin over again. The change of location has interrupted communication with my comrades. I am apprehensive of the fate of the prison blossoms. Strict surveillance makes the prospect of restoring connections doubtful. I am assigned to the ground floor, my cell being but a few feet distant from the officer's desk at the yard door. Watchful eyes are constantly upon me. It is impossible for any prisoner to converse with me. The range man alone could aid me in reaching my friends, but I have been warned against him. He is a stool who has earned his position as trustee by spying upon the inmates. I can expect no help from him, but perhaps the coffee boy may prove of service. I am planning to approach the man, when I am informed that prisoners from the hosiery department are locked up on the upper gallery. By means of the waste pipe, I learn of the developments during my stay in the dungeon. The discontent of the shop employees with the insufficient rations was intensified by the arrival of a wagon-load of bad meat. The stench permeated the yard, and several men were punished for passing uncomplimentary remarks about the food. The situation was aggravated by an additional increase of the task. The knitters and loopers were on the verge of rebellion. Twice within the month had the task been enlarged. They sent to the warden a request for a reduction. In reply came the appalling order for a further increase. Then a score of men struck. They remained in the cells, refusing to return to the shop unless the demand for better food and less work was complied with. With the aid of informers, the warden conducted a quiet investigation. One by one, the refractory prisoners were forced to submit. By a process of elimination, the authorities sifted the situation, and now it is whispered about that a decision has been reached, placing responsibility for the unique episode of a strike in the prison. An air of mystery hangs about the guards. Repeatedly I attempt to engage them in conversation, but the least reference to the strike seals their lips. I wonder at the peculiar looks they regard me with, when unexpectedly the cause is revealed. 3. It is Sunday noon. The rangeman pushes the dinner wagon along the tier. I stand at the door, ready to receive the meal. The overseer glances at me, then motions to the prisoner. The cart rolls past my cell. "Officer," I call out, "you missed me. Smell the pot pie, do you? Where's my dinner?" "You get none." The odor of the streaming delicacy, so keenly looked forward to every second Sunday, reaches my nostrils and sharpens my hunger. I have eaten sparingly all week in expectation of the treat, and now I am humiliated and enraged by being so unceremoniously deprived of the rare dinner. Angrily I rap the cup across the door. Again and again I strike the tin against it. The successive falls from bar to bar, producing a sharp, piercing clatter. A guard hastens along. "Stop that damn racket," he commands. "What's the matter with you?" "I didn't get dinner." "Yes, you did." "I did not." "Well, I suppose you don't deserve it." As he turns to leave, my can crashes against the door. 1, 2, 3. "What the hell do you want, eh?" "I want to see the warden." "You can't see him. You better keep quiet now." "I demand to see the warden. He is supposed to visit us every day. He hasn't been around for weeks. I must see him now." "If you don't shut up, I'll—" The captain of the block approaches. "What do you want, Berkman?" "I want to see the warden." "Can't see him. It's Sunday." "Captain," I retort, pointing to the rules on the wall of the cell, "there is an excerpt here from the statutes of Pennsylvania, directing the warden to visit each prisoner every day." "Never mind now," he interrupts. "What do you want to see the warden about?" "I want to know why I got no dinner." "Your name is off the list for the next 4 Sundays. "What for?" "That you'll have to ask the boss. I'll tell him you want to see him." Presently the overseer returns, informing me in a confidential manner that he has induced his nibs to grant me an audience. Admitted to the inner office, I find the warden at the desk, his face flushed with anger. "You are reported for disturbing the peace," he shouts at me. "There is also, another charge against him," the deputy interposes. "2 charges," the warden continues. "Disturbing the peace and making demands." "How dare you demand?" he roars. "Do you know where you are?" "I wanted to see you." "It is not a question of what you want or don't want. Understand that clearly. You are to obey the rules implicitly." "The rules direct you to visit—" "Silence! What is your request?" "I want to know why I am deprived of dinner." "It is not, for you to know. It is enough, that we know," the deputy retorts. "Mr. McPain," the warden interposes, "I'm going to speak plainly to him. From this day on," he turns to me, "you are on Pennsylvania diet for 4 weeks. During that time, no papers or books are permitted you. It will give you leisure to think over your behavior. I have investigated your conduct in the shop, and I am satisfied it was you who instigated the trouble there. You shall not have another chance to incite the men, even if you live as long as your sentence. But," he pauses an instant, then adds threateningly, "but you may as well understand it now as later. Your life is not worth the trouble you give us. Mark you well, whatever the cost, it will be at your expense. For the present you'll remain in solitary, where you cannot exert your pernicious influence. Officers, remove him to the basket." End of Section 23. Recording by Stephen Harvey.
Section 24 of Prison Memoirs of an Anarchist. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Chad Horner from Ballyclare. Prison Memoirs of an Anarchist by Alexander Berkman. Part 3, Chapter 24. The Basket Cell. 4 weeks of Pennsylvania diet have reduced me almost to a skeleton. A slice of wheat bread with a cup of unsweetened black coffee is my sole meal, with twice-a-week dinner of vegetable soup, from which every trace of meat has been removed. Every Saturday I am conducted to the office, to be examined by the physician and weighed. The whole week I look forward to the brief respite from the terrible basket cell. The sight of the stripped men scouring the floor, the friendly smile on the stealthily raised face as I pass through the hall, the strange blue of the sky, the sweet-scented aroma of the April morning. How quickly it is all over! But the 7 deep breaths I slowly inhale on the way to the office, and the eager 10 on my return, set my blood aglow with renewed life. For an instant my brain reels with the sudden rush of exquisite intoxication, and then I am in the tomb again. The torture of the basket is maddening. The constant dusk is driving me blind. Almost no light or air reaches me through the close wire netting covering the barred door. The foul odour is stifling. It grips my throat with deadly hold. The walls hem me in. Daily they press closer upon me till the cell seems to contract, and I feel crushed in the coffin of stone. From every point the whitewashed sides glare at me, unyielding, inexorable, and in confident assurance of their prey. The darkness of despondency gathers day by day. The hand of despair weighs heavier. At night the screeching of a crow across the river ominously voices the black raven keeping vigil in my heart. The windows in the hallway quake and tremble in the furious wind. Bleak and desolate quakes the day, another day, then another. Weak and apathetic I lie on the bed. Ever further recedes the world of the living. Still day follows night, and life is in the making, but I have no part in the pain and travail. Like a spark from the glowing furnace, flashing through the gloom, and swallowed in the darkness, I have been cast upon the shores of the forgotten. No sound reaches me from the island prison, where beats the fervent heart of the girl. No ray of hope falls across the bars of desolation, but on the threshold of Nirvana life recoils. In the very bowels of torment it cries out to be. Persecution feeds the fires of defiance, and nerves my resolution. Were I an ordinary prisoner, I should not care to suffer all these agonies. To what purpose with my impossible sentence? But my anarchist ideals and traditions rise in revolt against the vampire gloating over its prey. No, I shall not disgrace the cause. I shall not grieve my comrades by weak surrender. I will fight and struggle, and not be daunted by threat or torture. With difficulty I walk to the office for the weekly weighing. My step falters as I approach the scales, and I sway dizzily. As through a mist I see the doctor bending over me, his head pressing against my body. Somehow I reach the basket, mildly wondering why I did not feel the cold air. Perhaps they did not take me through the yard. Is it the block captain's voice? What did you say? Return to your old cell. You're on full diet now. End of section 24. Recording by Chad Horner from Ballyclare.
Section 25 of Prison Memoirs of an Anarchist. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Prison Memoirs of an Anarchist by Alexander Berkman. Part 2, Chapter 18, The Solitary. 1. Direct to Box A7, Allegheny City, Pennsylvania, March 25th, 1894. Dear Fedja, this letter is somewhat delayed. For certain reasons I missed mail day last month. Prison life, too, has its ups and downs, and just now I am on the downside. We are cautioned to refrain from referring to local affairs, therefore I can tell you only that I am in solitary, without work. I don't know how long I am to be kept locked up. It may be a month or a year. I hope it will not be the latter. I was not permitted to receive the magazines and delicacies you sent. We may subscribe for the daily papers, and you can easily imagine how religiously I read them from headline to the last ad. They keep me in touch, to some extent, with the living. Blessed be the shades of Gutenberg. Hugo and Zola, even Gogol and Turgenev are in the library. It is like meeting an old friend in a strange land, to find our own Bazarov discoursing, in English. Page after page unfolds the past. The solitary is forgotten. The walls melt away, and again I roam with Leatherstocking in the primitive forest, or sorrow with poor Oliver Twist. But the captain's daughter irritates me, and Pugachev, the rebellious soul, has turned a caricature in the awkward hands of the translator. And now comes Taras Bulba. Is it our own Taras, the fearless warrior, the scourge of Turk and Tartar? How grotesque is the brave old hetman, storming maledictions against the hated Muslims in long-winded German periods. Exasperated and offended, I turn my back upon the desecration, and open a book of poems. But instead of the requested Robert Burns, I find a volume of Wordsworth. Posies bloom on his pages, and rosebuds scent his rhymes, but the pains of the world's labour wake no chord in his soul. Science and romance, history and travel, religion and philosophy, all come trooping into the cell in irrelevant sequence, for the allowance of only one book at a time limits my choice. The variety of reading affords rich material for reflection, and helps to perfect my English. But some passage in the starry heavens suddenly brings me to earth, and the present is illumined with the direct perception of despair, and the anguished question surges through my mind, what is the use of all this study and learning? And then, but why hurry you with this tenor? I did not mean to say all this when I began. It cannot be undone. The sheet must be accounted for. Therefore it will be mailed to you. But I know, dear friend, you are also not bedded on roses. And the poor sailor? My space is all. Alex. 2. The lengthening chain of days in the solitary drags its heavy links through every change of misery. The cell is suffocating with the summer heat. Rarely does the fresh breeze from the river steal a caress upon my face. On the pretext of a draught, the unfriendly guard has closed the hall windows opposite my cell. Not a breath of air is stirring. The leaden hours of the night are insufferable, with the foul odour of the perspiration and excrement of 1,000 bodies. Sleepless, I toss on the withered mattress. The ravages of time and the weight of many inmates have demoralized it out of all semblance of a bed-tick. But the block captain persistently ignores my request for new straw, directing me to shake it up a bit. I am fearful of repeating the experiment. The clouds of dust almost strangled me. For days the cell remained hazy with the powdered filth. Impatiently I await the morning. The yard door will open before the marching lines, and the fresh air be wafted past my cell. I shall stand ready to receive the precious tonic that is to give me life this day. And when the block has belched forth its striped prey and silence mounts its vigil, I may improve a favourable moment to exchange a greeting with Johnny Davis. The young prisoner is in solitary on the tier above me. Thrice his request for a high-gear machine has been refused, and the tall youth forced to work doubled over a low table. Unable to exert his best efforts in the cramped position, Johnny has repeatedly been punished with the dungeon. Last week he suffered a hemorrhage. All through the night resounds his hollow cough. Desperate with the dread of consumption, Johnny has refused to return to work. The warden, relenting in a kindly mood, permitted him to resume his original high machine. But the boy has grown obdurate. He is determined not to go back to the shop whose officer caused him so much trouble. The prison discipline takes no cognizance of the situation. Regularly every Monday the torture is repeated. The youth is called before the deputy and assigned to the hosiery department. The unvarying refusal is followed by the dungeon, and then Johnny is placed in the solitary, to be cited again before the warden the ensuing Monday. I chafe at my helplessness to aid the boy. His course is suicidal, but the least suggestion of yielding enrages him. "I'll die before I give in," he told me. From whispered talks through the waste pipe I learned the sad story of his young life. He is 19, with a sentence of 5 years before him. His father, a brakeman, was killed in a railroad collision. The suit for damages was dragged through years of litigation, leaving the widow destitute. Since the age of 14, young Johnny had to support the whole family. Lately he was employed as the driver of a delivery wagon, associating with a rough element that gradually drew him into gambling. One day a shortage of $12 was discovered in the boy's accounts. The mills of justice began to grind, and Johnny was speedily clad in stripes. In vain I strive to absorb myself in the library book. The shoddy heroes of Laura Jean wake no response in my heart. The superior beings of Corelli, communing with mysteriously heavenly circles, stalk by, strange and inhuman. Here in the cell above me cries and moans the terrible tragedy of reality. What a monstrous thing it is that the whole power of the Commonwealth, all the machinery of government, is concentrated to crush this unfortunate atom. Innocently guilty, too, the poor boy is. Ensnared by the gaming spirit of the time, the feeble creature of vitiating environment, his fate is sealed by a moment of weakness. Yet his deviation from the path of established ethics is but a faint reflection of the lives of the men that decreed his doom. The hypocrisy of organized society, the very foundation of its existence, rests upon the negation and defiance of every professed principle of right and justice. Every feature of its face is a caricature, a travesty upon the semblance of truth. The whole life of humanity a mockery of the very name. Political mastery based on violence and Jesuitry. Industry gathering the harvest of human blood. Commerce ascendant on the ruins of manhood. Such is the morality of civilization. And over the edifice of this stupendous perversion the law sits enthroned, and religion weaves the spell of awe, and varnishes right and puzzles wrong, and bids the cowering helot intone, "Thy will be done." Devoutly Johnny goes to church, and prays forgiveness for his sins. The prosecutor was very hard on him, he told me. The blind mole perceives only the immediate, and is embittered against the persons directly responsible for his long imprisonment. But greater minds have failed to fully grasp the iniquity of the established. My beloved Burns, even, seems inadequate, powerfully as he moves my spirit, with his deep sympathy for the poor, the oppressed. But man's inhumanity to man is not the last word. The truth lies deeper. It is economic slavery, the savage struggle for a crumb, that has converted mankind into wolves and sheep. In liberty and communism none would have the will or the power to make countless thousands mourn. Verily, it is the system rather than individuals that is the source of pollution and degradation. My prison-house environment is but another manifestation of the Midas hand, whose cursed touch turns everything to the brutal service of mammon. Dullness fawns upon cruelty for advancement. With savage joy the shop foreman cracks his whip for his meed of the gold-transmuted blood. The famished bodies in stripe, the agonized brains reeling in the dungeon night, the men buried in basket and solitary. What human hand would turn the key upon a soul in utter darkness, but for the dread of a like fate, and the shadow it casts before? This nightmare is but an intensified replica of the world beyond, the larger prison locked with the levers of greed, guarded by the spawn of hunger. My mind reverts insistently to the life outside. It is a Herculean task to rouse apathy to the sordidness of its misery, yet if the people would but realize the depths of their degradation, and be informed of the means of deliverance, how joyously they would embrace anarchy! Quick and decisive would be the victory of the workers against the handful of their despoilers, an hour of sanity freed from prejudice and superstition, and the torch of liberty would flame round the world, and the banner of equality and brotherhood be planted upon the hills of a regenerated humanity. Ah, if the world would but pause for one short while, and understand, and become free! Involuntarily I am reminded of the old rabbinical lore. Only one instant of righteousness, and Messiah would come upon earth. The beautiful promise had strongly appealed to me in the days of childhood. The merciful God requires so little of us, I had often pondered. Why will we not abstain from sin and evil for just the twinkling of an eyelash? For weeks I went about weighed down with the grief of impenitent Israel refusing to be saved, my eager brain pregnant with projects of hastening the deliverance. Like a divine inspiration came the solution. At the stroke of the noon hour, on a preconcerted day, all the men and women of the Jewry throughout the world should bow in prayer. For a single stroke of time, all at once, behold, the Messiah come! In agonizing perplexity I gazed at my Hebrew tutor shaking his head. How his kindly smile quivered dismay into my thrilling heart. The children of Israel could not be saved thus, he spoke sadly, nay, not even in the most circumspect manner, affording our people in the farthest corners of the earth time to prepare for the solemn moment. The Messiah will come, the good tutor kindly consoled me. It had been promised. But the hour hath not arrived, he quoted. No man hath the power to hasten the steps of the deliverer. With a sense of sobering sadness, I think of the new hope, the revolutionary Messiah. Truly the old rabbi was wise beyond his ken. It hath been given to no man to hasten the march of delivery. Out of the people's need, from the womb of their suffering must be born the hour of redemption. Necessity alone, with its iron heel, will spur numb misery to effort, and waken the living dead. The process is tortuously slow, but the gestation of a new humanity cannot be hurried by impatience. We must bide our time, meanwhile preparing the workers for the great upheaval. The errors of the past are to be guarded against. Always has apparent victory been divested of its fruits and paralyzed into defeat, because the people were fettered by their respect for property, by the superstitious awe of authority, and by reliance upon leaders. These ghosts must be cast out, and the torch of reason lighted in the darkness of men's minds, ere blind rebellion can rend the midway clouds of defeat and sight the glory of the social revolution and the beyond. 3. A heavy nightmare oppresses my sleep. Confused sounds ring in my ears and beat upon my head. I wake in nameless dread. The cell-house is raging with uproar. Crash after crash booms through the hall. It thunders against the walls of the cell, then rolls like some monstrous drum along the galleries and abruptly ceases. In terror I cower on the bed. All is deathly still. Timidly I look around. The cell is in darkness, and only a faint gaslight flickers unsteadily in the corridor. Suddenly a cry cuts the silence, shrill and unearthly, bursting into wild laughter, and again the fearful thunder, now bellowing from the cell above, now muttering menacingly in the distance, then dying with a growl. And all is hushed again, and only the unearthly laughter rings through the hall. "Johnny! Johnny!" I call in alarm. "Johnny!" "The kid's in the hole," comes hoarsely through the privy. "This is Horse Thief. Is that you, Alec?" "Yes, what is it, Bob?" "Someone breaking up housekeeping." "Who?" "Can't tell. Maybe Smithy." "What's Smithy, Bob?" "Crazy Smith on Crank Row. Look out now. They're coming." The heavy doors of the rotunda groan on their hinges. Shadow-like giant figures glide past my cell. They walk inaudibly, felt-soled and portentous, the long riot clubs rigid at their sides. Behind them others, and then the warden, a large revolver gleaming in his hand. With bated breath I listen, conscious of the presence of other men at the doors. Suddenly wailing and wild laughter pierce the night. There is the rattling of iron, violent scuffling, the sickening thud of a falling body, and all is quiet. Noiselessly the bread cart flits by. The huge shadows, bending over the body stretched on the boards. The gong booms the rising hour. The morning sun glints a ray upon the bloody trail in the hall and hides behind the gathering mist. A squad of men in grey and black is marched from the yard. They kneel on the floor, and with sand and water scour the crimson flagstones. With great relief I learn that Crazy Smithy is not dead. He will recover, the rangeman assures me. The doctor bandaged the man's wounds, and then the prisoner, still unconscious, was dragged to the dungeon. Little by little I glean his story from my informant. Smith has been insane, at times violently, ever since his imprisonment, about 4 years ago. His partner, Burns, has also become deranged through worry over his sentence of 25 years. His madness assumed such revolting expression that the authorities caused his commitment to the insane asylum, but Smith remains on Crank Row, the warden insisting that he is shamming to gain an opportunity to escape. 4. The rare snatches of conversation with the old rangeman are events in the monotony of the solitary. Owing to the illness of Bob, communication with my friends is almost entirely suspended. In the forced idleness the hours grow heavy and languid, the days drag in unvarying sameness. By violent efforts of will I strangle the recurring thought of my long sentence and seek forgetfulness in reading. Volume after volume passes through my hands till my brain is steeped with the printed word. Page by page I recite the history of the Holy Church, the lives of the fathers and the saints, or read aloud to hear a human voice. The mythology of Greece and India, mingling with it, for the sake of variety, a few chapters from Mill and Spencer. But in the midst of an intricate passage in the unknowable, or in the heart of a difficult mathematical problem, I suddenly become aware of my pencil drawing familiar figures on the library slate. 22 times 12 equals 264. What is this, I wonder? And immediately I proceed, in semi-conscious manner, to finish the calculation. 264 times 30 equals 7,920 days. 7,920 times 24 equals 190,080 hours. 190,080 times 60 equals 11,404,800 minutes. 11,404,800 times 60 equals 648,288,000 seconds. But the next moment I am aghast at the realization that my computation allows only 30 days per month, whereas the year consists of 365, sometimes even of 366 days, and again I repeat the process, multiplying 22 by 365, and am startled to find that I have almost 700 million seconds to pass in the solitary. From the official calendar alongside of the rules, the cheering promise faces me. Good conduct shortens time. But I have been repeatedly reported and punished. They will surely deprive me of the commutation. With great care I figure out my allowance. 1 month on the first year, 1 on the second, 2 on the third and fourth, 3 on the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th, 4 months good time on each succeeding year. I shall therefore have to serve 15 years and 3 months in this place, and then 11 months in the workhouse. I have been here now 2 years. It still leaves me 14 years and 2 months, or more than 5,170 days. Appalled by the figures, I pace the cell in agitation. It is hopeless. It is folly to expect to survive such a sentence, especially in view of the warden's persecution and the petty tyranny of the keepers. Thoughts of suicide and escape, wild fantasies of unforeseen developments in the world at large that will somehow result in my liberation, all struggle in confusion, leaving me faint and miserable. My absolute isolation holds no promise of deliverance. The days of illness and suffering fill me with anguish. With a sharp pang I observe the thinning of my hair. The evidence of physical decay rouses the fear of mental collapse, insanity. I shudder at the terrible suggestion, and lash myself into a fever of irritation with myself, the rangeman, and every passing convict, my heart seething with hatred of the warden, the guards, the judge, and that unembodied, shapeless, but inexorable and merciless thing, the world. In the moments of reacting calm I apply myself to philosophy and science determinedly, with the desperation born of horror. but the dread ghost is ever before me. It follows me up and down the cell, mocks me with the wild laughter of Crazy Smith in the stillness of the night, and with the moaning and waking of my neighbour suddenly gone mad. End of Section 25. Recording by Stephen Harvey. Section 26 of Prison Memoirs of an Anarchist. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Prison Memoirs of an Anarchist by Alexander Berkman. Part 2. Chapter 19. Memory Guests. Often the chaplain pauses at my door and speaks words of encouragement. I feel deeply moved by his sympathy, but my revolutionary traditions forbid the expression of my emotions. A cog in the machinery of oppression, he might mistake my gratitude for the obsequiousness of the fawning convict. But I hope he feels my appreciation in the simple thank you. It is kind of him to lend me books from his private library, and occasionally also permit me an extra sheet of writing paper. Correspondence with the girl and the twin, and the unfrequent exchange of notes with my comrades are the only links that still bind me to the living. I feel weary and life-worn, indifferent to the trivial incidents of existence that seem to hold such exciting interest for the other inmates. Old Sammy, the rangeman, grown nervous with the approach of liberty, inverts 100 opportunities to unburden his heart. All day long he limps from cell to cell, pretending to scrub the door-sills or dust the bars, meanwhile chattering volubly to the solitaries. Listlessly I suffer the oft-repeated recital of the news, elaborately discussed and commented upon with impassioned earnestness. He interrupts his anathemas upon the rotten food and the thieving murderers to launch into enthusiastic details of the meal he will enjoy on the day of release, the imprisoned friends he will remember with towels and handkerchiefs. But he grows pensive at the mention of the folks at home. The old woman died of a broken heart. The boys have not written a line in 3 years. He fears they have sold the little farmhouse and flown to the city. But the joy of coming freedom drives away the sad thought, and he mumbles hopefully, I'll see, and rejoices in being alive and still good for a while, and then abruptly changes the conversation and relates minutely how that poor crazy Dick was yesterday found hanging in the cell, and he the first to discover him and to help the guards cut him down. And last week he was present when the physician tried to revive the little Dago, and if the doctor had only returned quicker from the theatre, poor Joe might have been saved. He took a fit, and the screws jest let him lay, waiting for the doc, they says. Hope they don't kill me yet, he comments, hobbling away. The presence of death daunts the thought of self-destruction. Ever stronger asserts itself the love of life. The will to be roots deeper. But the hope of escape recedes with the ebbing of my vitality. The constant harassing has forced the discontinuation of the blossoms. The eccentric warden seems to have conceived a great fear of an anarchist conspiracy. Special orders have been issued, placing the trio under extraordinary surveillance. Suspecting our clandestine correspondence, yet unable to trace it, the authorities have decided to separate us in a manner excluding all possibility of communication. Apparently, I am to be continued in the solitary indefinitely, while Nold is located in the south wing, and Bauer removed to the furthest cell on an upper gallery in the north block. The precious magazine is suspended, and only the daring of the faithful horse-thief enables us to exchange an occasional note. Amid the fantastic shapes cast by the dim candlelight, I pass the long winter evenings. The prison day between 7 a.m. and 9 p.m. I divide into 3 parts, devoting 4 hours each to exercise, English, and reading, the remaining 2 hours occupied with meals and cleaning up. Surrounded by grammars and dictionaries borrowed from the chaplain, I absorb myself in a sentence of Shakespeare, dissecting each word, studying origin and derivation, analyzing prefix and suffix. I find moments of exquisite pleasure in tracing some simple expression through all the vicissitudes of its existence to its Latin or Greek source. In the history of the corresponding epoch, I seek the people's joys and tragedies, contemporary with the fortunes of the world. Philology, with the background of history, leads me into the pastures of mythology and comparative religion, through the mazes of metaphysics and warring philosophies, to rationalism and evolutionary science. Oblivious of my environment, I walk with the disciples of Socrates, flee Athens with the persecuted Diagoras, the atheist, and listen in ecstasy to the sweet-voiced lute of Arion, or with Suetonius I pass in review the 12 Caesars, and weep with the hostages swelling the triumph of the eternal city. But on the very threshold of Cleopatra's boudoir, about to enter with the intrepid Mark Antony, I am met by 3 giant slaves with the command, "A7, hands up, step out to be searched." For days my enfeebled nerves quiver with the shock. With difficulty I force myself to pick up the thread of my life amid the spirits of the past. The placid waters have been disturbed, and all the miasma of the quagmire seethes towards the surface and fills my cup with the bitterness of death. The release of old Sammy stirs me to the very depths. Many prisoners have come and gone during my stay. With some I merely touched hands as they passed in the darkness and disappeared, leaving no trace in my existence. But the old rangeman, with his smiling eyes and fervid optimism, has grown dear to me. He shared with me his hopes and fears, divided his extra slice of cornbread, and strove to cheer me in his own homely manner. I miss his genial presence. Something has gone out of my life with him, leaving a void, saddening, gnawing. In thought I follow my friend through the gates of the prison, out into the free, the alluring outside, the charmed circle that holds the promise of life and joy and liberty. Like a horrible nightmare the sombre walls fade away, and only a dark shadow vibrates in my memory, like a hidden menace, faint, yet ever present and terrible. The sun glows brilliant in the heavens, shell-like wavelets float upon the azure, and sweet odours are everywhere about me. All the longing of my soul wells up with violent passion, and in a sudden transport of joy I fling myself upon the earth, and weep and kiss it in prayerful bliss. The candle sputters, hisses, and dies. I sit in the dark. Silently lifts the veil of time. The little New York flat rises before me. The girl is returning home, the roses of youth grown pallid amid the shadows of death. Only her eyes grow firmer and deeper, a look of challenge in her saddened face. As on an open page I read the suffering of her prison experience, the sharper lines of steadfast purpose. The joys and sorrows of our mutual past unfold before me, and again I live in the old surroundings. The memorable scene of our first meeting in the little café at Saks projects clearly. The room is chilly in the November dusk as I return from work and secure my accustomed place. One by one the old habitués drop in, and presently I am in a heated discussion with 2 Russian refugees at the table opposite. The door opens, and a young woman enters. Well-knit, with the ruddy vigour of youth, she diffuses an atmosphere of strength and vitality. I wonder who the newcomer may be. 2 years in the movement have familiarized me with the personnel of the revolutionary circles of the metropolis. This girl is evidently a stranger. I am quite sure I have never met her at our gatherings. I motion to the passing proprietor. He smiles, anticipating my question. "You want to know who the young lady is?" he whispers. I'll see. Somehow I find myself at her table. Without constraint we soon converse like old acquaintances, and I learn that she left her home in Rochester to escape the stifling provincial atmosphere. She is a dressmaker and hopes to find work in New York. I like her simple, frank confidence. The comrade on her lips thrills me. She is one of us, then. With a sense of pride in the movement, I enlarge upon the activities of our circle. There are important meetings shot to attend, many people to meet. Hasselmann is conducting a course in sociology. Schultze is giving splendid lectures. "Have you heard most?" I ask suddenly. "No? You must hear our grand old man. He speaks tomorrow. Will you come with me?" Eagerly I look forward to the next evening and hasten to the café. It is frosty outdoors as I walk the narrow dark streets in animated discussion with Comrade Rochester. The ancient sidewalks are uneven and cracked in spots crusted with filth. As we cross Delancey Street, the girl slips and almost falls, when I catch her in my arms just in time to prevent her head striking the curbstone. "You have saved my life." She smiles at me, her eyes dancing vivaciously. With great pride I introduce my new friend to the intelligentsia of the ghetto among the exiles of the colony. Ah, the exultation, the joy of being! The whole history of revolutionary Russia is mirrored in our circles. Every shade of temperamental nihilism and political view is harboured there. I see Hartmann, surrounded by the halo of conspirative mystery. At his side is the Veliko-Russian, with flowing beard and powerful frame, of the older generation, of the Narodovoylitzy. And there is Shevitz, big and broad of feature, the typical Dvoryanin, who has cast in his lot with the proletariat. The line of contending faiths is not drawn sharply in the colony. Kean is amongst us, stentorian of voice and bristling with aggressive vitality. Solotaroff, his pale student face peculiarly luminous. Miller, poetically eloquent, and his strangely named brother Brandes, looking consumptive from his experience in the Odessa prison. Timmerman and Alenikov, Rinke and Weinstein, all are united in enthusiasm for the common cause. Types from Turgenev and Chernyshevsky, from Dostoevsky and Nekrasov, mingle in the seeming confusion of reality, individualized with varying shade and light. And other elements are in the colony, the splashed quivers of the simmering waters of Tsardom, shapes in the making, still being kneaded in the mould of old tradition and new environment. Who knows what shall be the amalgam, some day to be recast by the master hand of a new Turgenev. Often the solitary hours are illumined by scenes of the past. With infinite detail I live again through the years of the inspiring friendship that held the girl, the twin, and myself in the closest bonds of revolutionary aspiration and personal intimacy. How full of interest and rich promise was life in those days, so far away when after the hours of humiliating drudgery in the factory I would hasten to the little room in Suffolk Street, small and narrow with its diminutive table and solitary chair. The cage-like bedroom would be transfigured into the sanctified chamber of fate, holding the balance of the world's wheel. Only two could sit on the little cot, the third on the rickety chair, and if somebody else called we would stand around the room, filling the air with the glowing hope of our young hearts, in the firm consciousness that we were hastening the steps of progress, advancing the glorious dawn. The memory of life outside intensifies the misery of the solitary. I brood over the uselessness of my suffering. My mission in life terminated with the attentat. What good can my continued survival do? My propagandistic value as a living example of class injustice and political persecution is not of sufficient importance to impose upon me the duty of existence, and even if it were, the almost 3 years of my imprisonment have served the purpose. Escape is out of consideration. So long as I remain constantly under lock and key, the subject of special surveillance. Communication with Nold and Bauer, too, is daily growing more difficult. My health is failing fast. I am barely able to walk. What is the use of all this misery and torture? What is the use? In such moments I stand on the brink of eternity. Is it sheer apathy and languor that hold the weak thread of life, or nature's law and the inherent spirit of resistance? Were I not in the enemy's power, I should unhesitatingly cross the barrier, but as a pioneer of the cause I must live and struggle. Yet life without activity or interest is terrifying. I long for sympathy and affection. With an aching heart I remember my comrades and friends, and the girl. More and more my mind dwells upon tender memories. I wake at night with a passionate desire for the sight of a sweet face, the touch of a soft hand. A wild yearning fills me for the women I have known as they pass in my mind's eye from the time of my early youth to the last kiss of feminine lips. With a thrill I recall each bright look and tender accent. My heart beats tumultuously as I meet little Nadja on the way to school, pretending I do not see her. I turn around to admire the golden locks floating in the breeze, when I surprise her stealthily watching me. I adore her secretly, but proudly decline my chum's offer to introduce me. How foolish of me! But I know no timid shrinking as I wait, on a cold winter evening, for our neighbour's servant girl to cross the yard, and how unceremoniously I embrace her. She is not a Barishnya. I need not mask my feelings. And she is so primitive. She accuses me of knowing things not fit for a boy of my age. But she kisses me again, and passion wakes at the caress of the large, coarse hand. My Eldridge Street platonic sweetheart stands before me, and I tingle with every sensual emotion of my first years in New York. Out of the New Haven days rises the image of Luba, sweeping me with an unutterable longing for the unattained. And again I live through the experiences of the past. passionately visualizing every detail with images that flatter my erotic palate and weave exquisite allurement about the urge of sex. End of section 26. Recording by Stephen Harvey. Section 27 of Prison Memoirs of an Anarchist. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Prison Memoirs of an Anarchist by Alexander Berkman. Part 2, Chapter 20. A Day in the Cell House. 1. To K and G. Good news. I was let out of the cell this morning. The coffee boy on my range went home yesterday, and I was put in his place. It's lucky the old deputy died. He was determined to keep me in solitary. In the absence of the warden, Benny Greaves, the new deputy, told me he will risk giving me a job, but he has issued strict orders I should not be permitted to step into the yard. I'll therefore still be under special surveillance, and I shall not be able to see you. But I am in touch with our faithful, and we can now resume a more regular correspondence. Over a year in solitary, it's almost like liberty to be out of the cell. 2. My position as a coffee boy affords many opportunities for closer contact with the prisoners. I assist the rangeman in taking care of a row of 64 cells situated on the ground floor and lettered K. Above it are, successively, I, H, G, and F, located on the yard side of the cell house. On the opposite side, facing the river, the ranges are labeled A, B, C, D, and E. The galleries form parallelograms about each double cell row, bridged at the center. They permit easy access to the several ranges. The 10 tiers, with a total of 640 cells, are contained within the outer stone building and comprise the north block of the penitentiary. It connects with the south wing by means of the rotunda. Cell ranges, south block. The bottom tiers A and K serve as receiving ranges. Here every new arrival is temporarily celled before he is assigned to work, and transferred to the gallery occupied by his shop fellows. On these ranges are also located the men undergoing special punishment in basket and solitary. The lower end of the 2 ranges is designated Bughouse Row. It contains the cranks, among whom are classed inmates in different stages of mental aberration. My various duties of sweeping the hall, dusting the cell doors, and assisting at feeding enable me to become acquainted and to form friendships. I marvel at the inadequacy of my previous notions of the criminal. I resent the presumption of science that pretends to evolve the intricate convolutions of a living human brain out of the shape of a digit cut from a dead hand and labels it criminal type. Daily association dispels the myth of the species and reveals the individual. Growing intimacy discovers the humanity beneath fibers coarsened by lack of opportunity and brutalized by misery and fear. There is one Reddy Butch, a rosy-cheeked young fellow of 21, as frank-spoken a boy as ever honoured a striped suit. A jolly criminal is Butch, with his irrepressible smile and gay song. He was just dying to take his girl for a ride, he relates to me. But he couldn't afford it. He earned only $7 per week. As butcher's boy, he always gave his mother every penny he made. But the girl kept taunting him because he couldn't spend anything on her. And I goes to work and swipes a rig and say, Alec, you ought to see me drive to me girl's house big like. In I goes. Put on your glad duds, Kate, I says. I'll give you the drive of your life. And I did. You bet your sweet life I did, ha ha. But when he returned the rig to its owner, Butch was arrested. Just a prank, your honour, I says to the judge. What do you think, Alec? Thought I'd die when he said 3 years. That was foolish, of course, but there's no use crying over spilt milk. But you know, the worst of it is, me girl went back on me. Wouldn't that jar you, eh? Well, I'll try hard to forget the minx. She's a sweet girl, though, you bet. Ha ha ha. And there is young Rush, the descendant of the celebrated family of the great American physician. The delicate features, radiant with spirituality, bear a striking resemblance to Shelley. The limping gait recalls the tragedy of Byron. He is in for murder. He sits at the door, an open book in his hands. The page is moist with the tears silently trickling down his face. He smiles at my approach, and his expressive eyes light up the darkened cell, like a glimpse of the sun breaking through the clouds. He was wooing a girl on a summer night. The skiff's suddenly upturned. Right opposite here, he points to the river, near McKee's Rocks. He was dragged out, unconscious. They told him the girl was dead, and that he was her murderer. He reaches for the photograph on his table, and bursts into sobs. Daily I sweep the length of the hall, advancing from cell to cell with deliberate stroke, all the while watching for an opportunity to exchange a greeting with the prisoners. My mind reverts to poor Wingy. How he cheered me in the first days of misery, how kind he was. In gentler tones I speak to the unfortunates, and encourage the new arrivals, or indulge some demented prisoner in a harmless whim. The dry sweeping of the hallway raises a cloud of dust, and loud coughing follows in my wake. Taking advantage of the old block captain's cold in the head, I cautiously hint at the danger of germs lurking in the dust-laden atmosphere. A little wet sawdust on the floor, Mr. Mitchell, and you wouldn't catch cold so often. Capital idea, he thinks, and thereafter I guard the precious supply under the bed in my cell. In little ways I seek to help the men in solitary. Every trifle means so much. Long Joe, the rangeman, whose duty it is to attend to their needs, is engrossed with his own troubles. The poor fellow is serving 25 years, and he is much worried by Wild Bill and Big Head Wilson. They are constantly demanding to see the warden. It is remarkable that they are never refused. The guards seem to stand in fear of them. Wild Bill is a self-confessed invert, and there are peculiar rumours concerning his intimacy with the warden. Recently Bill complained of indigestion, and a guard sent me to deliver some delicacies to him. "From the warden's table," he remarked with a sly wink, and Wilson is jocularly referred to as the deputy, even by the officers. He is still in stripes, but he seems to wield some powerful influence over the new deputy. He openly defies the rules, upbraids the guards, and issues orders. He is the warden's runner, clad with the authority of his master. The prisoners regard Bill and Wilson as stools, and cordially hate them, but none dare offend them. Poor Joe is constantly harassed by Deputy Wilson. There seems to be bitter enmity between the two on account of a young prisoner who prefers the friendship of Joe. Worried by the complex intrigues of life in the block, the rangeman is indifferent to the unfortunates in the cells. Butch is devoured by bedbugs, and Praying Andy's mattress is flattened into a pancake. The simple-minded lifetimer is being neglected. He has not yet recovered from the assault by Johnny Smith, who hit him on the head with a hammer. I urge the rangeman to report to the captain the need of bedbugging Butch's cell, of supplying Andy with a new mattress, and of notifying the doctor of the increasing signs of insanity among the solitaries. 3. Breakfast is over. The lines form in lockstep and march to the shops. Broom in hand, rangeman and assistants step upon the galleries and commence to sweep the floors. Officers pass among the tiers, closely scrutinizing each cell. Now and then they pause, facing a delinquent. They note his number and unlock the door, and the prisoner joins the sick line on the ground floor. One by one the men augment the row. They walk slowly, bent and coughing, painfully limping down the steep flights. From every range they come, the old and decrepit, the young consumptives, the lame and asthmatic, a tottering old negro, an idiotic white boy. All look withered and dejected, a ghastly line, palsied and blear-eyed, blanched in the valley of death. The rotunda door opens noisily, and the doctor enters, accompanied by Deputy Warden Greaves and Assistant Deputy Hopkins. Behind them is a prisoner, dressed in dark grey and carrying a medicine box. Dr. Boyce glances at the long line and knits his brow. He looks at his watch, and the frown deepens. He has much to do. Since the death of the senior doctor, the young graduate is the sole physician of the big prison. He must make the rounds of the shops before noon, and visit the patients in the hospital before the warden or the deputy drops in. Mr. Greaves sits down at the officer's desk near the hall entrance. The assistant deputy, pad in hand, places himself at the head of the sick line. The doctor leans against the door of the rotunda facing the deputy. The block officers stand within call, at respectful distances. 255, the assistant deputy calls out. A slender young man leaves the line and approaches the doctor. He is tall and well-featured, the large eyes lustrous in the pale face. He speaks in a hoarse voice.
"Doctor, there's something the matter with my side. I have pains and I cough bad at night and in the morning."
"All right," the doctor interrupts without looking up from his notebook. "Give him some salts," he adds, with a nod to his assistant. "Next," the deputy calls.
"Will you please excuse me from the shop for a few days?"
The sick prisoner pleads, a tremor in his voice. The physician glances questioningly at the deputy. The latter cries impatiently, "Next! Next man!" striking the desk twice in quick succession with the knuckles of his hand. "Return to the shop," the doctor says to the prisoner. "Next!" the deputy calls, spurting a stream of tobacco juice in the direction of the cuspidor. It strikes sideways and splashes over the foot of the approaching new patient, a young negro, his neck covered with bulging tumors. "Number?" the doctor inquires. 137. A137, the deputy mumbles, his head thrown back to receive a fresh handful of scrap tobacco.
"Guess I's got the big neck."
"I is, Mr. Boyce," the negro says hoarsely. "Salts. Return to work. Next. A126. A young man with a parchment-like face, sere and yellow, walks painfully from the line.
"Doctor, I seem to be getting worser, and I'm afraid—"
"What's the trouble?"
"Pains in the stomach, getting so terrible I—"
"Give him a plaster. Next."
"Plaster, hell!"
The prisoner breaks out in a fury, his face growing livid.
"Look at this, will you?"
With a quick motion he pulls his shirt up to his head. His chest and back are entirely covered with porous plasters. Not an inch of skin is visible.
"Damn your plasters," he cries with sudden sobs. "I ain't got no more room for plasters. I'm pretty near dying, and you won't do nothing for me."
The guards pounce upon the man and drag him into the rotunda. One by one the sick prisoners approach the doctor. He stands, head bent, penciling, rarely glancing up. The elongated, ascetic face wears a preoccupied look. He drawls mechanically in monosyllables. "Next. Number. Salts. Plaster. Salts. Next." Occasionally he glances at his watch. His brows knit closer, the heavy furrow deepens, and the austere face grows more severe and rigid. Now and then he turns his eyes upon the deputy warden, sitting opposite, his jaws incessantly working, a thin stream of tobacco trickling down his chin and heavily streaking the grey beard. Cheeks protruding, mouth full of juice, the deputy mumbles unintelligently, turns to expectorate, suddenly shouts, "Next!" and gives 2 quick knocks on the desk, signalling to the physician to order the man to work. Only the withered and the lame are temporarily excused, the deputy striking the desk thrice to convey the permission to the doctor. Dejected and forlorn, the sick line is conducted to the shops, coughing and wheezing and moaning, only to repeat the ordeal the following morning. Quite often, breaking down at the machine or fainting at the task, the men are carried on a stretcher to the hospital to receive a respite from the killing toil, a short intermission, or a happier, eternal reprieve. The lame and the feeble, too withered to be useful in the shops, are sent back to their quarters and locked up for the day. Only these, the permitted delinquents, the insane, the men in solitary, and the sweepers, remain within the inner walls during working hours. The pall of silence descends upon the house of death. 4. The guards creep stealthily along the tiers. Officer George Dean, lank and tall, tiptoes past the cells, his sharply hooked nose in advance, his evil-looking eyes peering through the bars, scrutinizing every inmate. Suddenly the heavy jaws snap. "Hey, you! 1139! On the bed again! What? Sick! Hell! No dinner!" Noisily he pretends to return to the desk in front, quietly steals into the niche of a cell door, and stands motionless, alertly listening. A suppressed murmur proceeds from the upper galleries. Cautiously the guard advances, hastily passes several cells, pauses a moment, and then quickly steps into the center of the hall, shouting, "Cells 47, K, I, H, talking through the pipe. Gotcha this time, all right." He grins broadly as he returns to the desk and reports to the block captain. The guards ascend the galleries, levers are pulled, doors opened with a bang, and the 3 prisoners are marched to the office. For days their cells remain vacant. The men are in the dungeon. Gaunt and cadaverous, Guard Hughes makes the rounds of the tiers on a tour of inspection. With bleary eyes sunk deep in his head, he gazes intently through the bars. The men are out at work. Leisurely he walks along, stepping from cell to cell, here tearing a picture off the wall, there gathering a few scraps of paper. As I pass along the hall, he slams a door on the range above and appears upon the gallery. His pockets bulge with confiscated goods. He glances around as the deputy enters from the yard. "Hey, Jasper!" the guard calls. The coloured trustee scampers up the stairs. "Take this to the front." The officer hands him a dilapidated magazine, 2 pieces of cornbread, a little square of cheese, and several candles that some weak-eyed prisoner had saved up by sitting in the dark for weeks. "Show it to the deputy," the officer says in an undertone. "I'm doing business all right." The trustee laughs boisterously. Yassa, dat yo sure am." The guard steps into the next cell, throwing a quick look to the front. The deputy is disappearing through the rotunda door. The officer casts his eye about the cell. The table is littered with magazines and papers. A piece of matting, stolen from the shops, is on the floor. On the bed are some bananas and a bunch of grapes. Forbidden fruit. The guard steps back to the gallery, a faint smile on his thin lips. He reaches for the heart-shaped wooden block hanging above the cell. It bears the legend, painted in black, A480. On the reverse side, the officer reads, "Collins, Hamilton, dated..." His watery eyes strain to decipher the pencil marks, paled by the damp, whitewashed wall. "Jasper," he calls, "come up here." The trustee hastens to him. "You know who this man is, Jasper? A480? I sure knows. Dat am Hamilton, the bank bezzler." "Where's he working?" "What he want to work for. He am the captain's clerk. In the office, he am." "All right, Jasper." The guard carefully closes the clerk's door and enters the adjoining cell. It looks clean and orderly. The stone floor is bare, the bedding smooth. The library book, tin can, and plate are neatly arranged on the table. The officer ransacks the bed, throws the blankets on the floor, and stamps his feet upon the pillow in search of secreted contraband. He reaches up to the wooden shelf on the wall and takes down the little bag of scrap tobacco, the weekly allowance of the prisoners. He empties a goodly part into his hand, shakes it up, and thrusts it into his mouth. He produces a prison plug from his pocket, bites off a piece, spits in the direction of the privy and yawns, looks at his watch, deliberates a moment, spurts a stream of juice into the corner, and cautiously steps out on the gallery. He surveys the field, leans over the railing, and squints at the front. The chairs at the officer's desk are vacant. The guard retreats into the cell, yawns and stretches, and looks at his watch again. It is only 9 o'clock. He picks up the library book, listlessly examines the cover, flings the book on the shelf, spits disgustedly, then takes another chew, and sprawls down on the bed. 5. At the head of the hall, Senior Officer Woods and Assistant Deputy Hopkins sit at the desk. Of superb physique and glowing vitality, Mr. Woods wears his new honours as captain of the block with aggressive self-importance. He has recently been promoted from the shop to the charge of the north wing, on the morning shift, from 5 a.m. to 1 p.m. Every now and then he leaves his chair, walks majestically down the hallway, crosses the open centre, and returns past the opposite cell row. With studied dignity he resumes his seat and addresses his superior, the assistant deputy, in measured, low tones. The latter listens gravely, his head slightly bent, his sharp grey eyes restless above the heavy-rimmed spectacles. As Mr. Hopkins, angular and stoop-shouldered, rises to expectorate into the nearby sink, he espies the shining face of Jasper on an upper gallery. The assistant deputy smiles, produces a large apple from his pocket, and holding it up to view, asks, "How does this strike you, Jasper?" "Looks to this nigger like a watermelon, Colonel." Wood struggles to suppress a smile. Hopkins laughs and motions to the negro. The trustee joins him at the desk. "I'll bet the coon could get away with this apple in 2 bites," the assistant deputy says to Woods. "Hardly possible," the latter remarks doubtfully. "You don't know this darky, Scott," Hopkins rejoins. "I know him for the last, 15, 18, 20 years. That's when you first came here, eh, Jasper?" "Yes, sir, about that." "In the old prison, then?" Woods inquires. "Yes, of course. You was there, Jasper, when Shoebox Miller got out, wasn't you?" "You remember good, Colonel. That I was, sure enough. And mighty slick it was, bless me, to have himself nailed in that shoebox and mek his getaway." "Yes, and this is your 4th time since then, I believe." No, sir. There you am wrong, Colonel. You reminiscent damn bad. This just 3 times. Just 3. "Come off, it's 4. 3, Colonel. No more." "Do you think, Mr. Hopkins, Jasper could eat the apple in 2 bites?" Woods reminds him. "I'm sure he can. There's nothing in the eating line this coon couldn't do. Here, Jasper, you get the apple if you make it in 2 bites. Don't disgrace me now." The negro grins. "Pretty big, Colonel, but I'm going to try powerful hard." With a heroic effort he stretches his mouth till his face looks like a veritable cavern, reaching from ear to ear and edged by large shimmering tusks. With both hands he inserts the big apple and his sharp teeth come down with a loud snap. He chews, quickly, swallows, repeats the performance, and then holds up his hands. The apple has disappeared. The assistant deputy roars with laughter. "What did I tell you, eh, Scott? What did I tell you? Ho, ho, ho!" The tears glisten in his eye. They amuse themselves with the Negro trustee by the hour. He relates his experiences, tells humorous anecdotes, and the officers are merry. Now and then Deputy Warden Greaves drops in. Wood rises. "Have a seat, Mr. Greaves." That's all right, Scott," the deputy mumbles, his eye searching for the cuspidor. "Sit down, Scott. I'm as young as any of you." With mincing step he walks into the first cell, reserved for the guards, pulls a bottle from his hip pocket, takes several quick gulps, wobbles back to the desk, and sinks heavily into Wood's seat. "Jasper, go bring me a chew." He turns to the trustee. "Yassa. Scrap, deputy?" "Yeah, nip a plug, too." Yassa, immediately." "What are you men doing here?" The deputy blusters at the two subordinates. Woods frowns, squares his shoulders, glances at the deputy, and then relaxes into a dignified smile. Assistant Hopkins looks sternly at the deputy warden from above his glasses. "That's all right, Greaves," he says familiarly, a touch of scorn in his voice. "Say, you should have seen that nigger Jasper swallow a great big apple in 2 bites, as big as your head, I'll swear. That show?" The deputy nods sleepily. The Negro comes running up with a paper scrap in one hand, a plug in the other. The deputy slowly opens his eyes. He walks unsteadily to the cell, remains there a few minutes, and returns with both hands fumbling at his hip pocket. He spits viciously at the sink, sits down, fills his mouth with tobacco, glances at the floor, and demands hoarsely, "Where's all them spittoons, you men?" "Just being cleaned, Mr. Greaves," Wood replies. "Cleaned? Always the same story. I ordered you." "Ordered? Hey, bring spittoon, Jasper." He wags his head drowsily. "He means he ordered spittoons by the wagon load," Hopkins says with a wink at Woods. "It was the very first order he gave me when he became deputy, after Jimmy Payne died. I tell you, Scott, we won't soon see another deputy like old Jimmy. He was deputy, all right, every inch of him. Wouldn't stand for the old man, the warden, interfering with him either. Not like this here." He points contemptuously at the snoring Greaves. "Here, Benny." He raises his voice and slaps the deputy on the knee. "Here's Jasper with your spittoon." Greaves wakes with a start and gazes stupidly about. Presently, noticing the trustee with a large cuspidor, and spurts a long jet at it. "Say, Jasper," Hopkins calls to the retiring Negro, "the deputy wants to hear that story you told us a while ago about you got the left hind foot of a she-rabbit on a moonlit night in a graveyard." "Who should I want to hear it?" The deputy bristles, suddenly wide awake. "Yes, you do, Greaves. The rabbit foot brings good luck, you know. This coon here wears it on his neck. Show it to the deputy, Jasper." Prisoner Wilson, the warden's favourite messenger, enters from the yard. With quick, energetic step he passes the officers at the desk, entirely ignoring their presence, and walks nonchalantly down the hall, his unnaturally large head set close upon the heavy, almost necklace shoulders. "Hey, you, Wilson, what are you after?" the deputy shouts after him. Without replying, Wilson continues on his way. "Deputy Wilson," the Negro jeers, with a look of hatred and envy. Assistant Deputy Hopkins rises in his seat. "Wilson," he calls with a quiet sternness, "Mr. Greaves is speaking to you. Come back at once." His face purple with anger, Wilson retraces his steps. "What do you want, deputy?" he demands savagely. The deputy looks uneasy and fidgets in his chair, but catching the severe eye of Hopkins, he shouts vehemently, "What do you want in the block?" "On Captain Edward S. Wright's business," Wilson replies with a sneer. "Well, go ahead, but next time I call you, you better come back." "The warden told me to hurry. I'll report to him that you detained me with an idle question," Wilson snarls back. "That'll do, Wilson," the assistant deputy warns him. "Wait till I see the captain," Wilson growls as he departs. "If I had my way, I'd knock his damn block off," the assistant mutters. "Such impudence in a convict cannot be tolerated," Wood comments. "The captain won't hear a word against Wilson," the deputy says meekly. Hopkins frowns. They sit in silence. The Negro busies himself, wiping the yellow-stained floor around the cuspidor. The deputy ambles stiffly to the open cell. Woods rises, steps back to the wall, and looks up to the top galleries. No one is about. He crosses to the other side and scans the bottom range. Long and dismal stretches the hall, in melancholy white and grey, the gloomy cell building brooding in the centre like some monstrous hunchback without life or motion. Woods resumes his seat. "Quiet as a church," he remarks with evident satisfaction. "You're doing well, Scott," the deputy mumbles. "Doing well." A faint metallic sound breaks upon the stillness. The officers prick up their ears. The rasping continues and grows louder. The negro trusty tiptoes up the tiers. "Somebody with his spoon on the door," the deputy remarks indifferently. The block captain motions to me. "See who's rapping there, will you?" I walk quickly along the hall. By keeping close to the wall, I can see up to the doors of the third gallery. Here and there a nose protrudes in the air, the bleached face glued to the bars, the eyes glassy. The rapping grows louder as I advance. "Who is it?" I call. "Up here, 18C. "Is that you, Ed?" "Yes, got a bad hemorrhage. Tell the screw I must see the doctor." I run to the desk. "Mr. Woods," I report. "18C got a hemorrhage. Can't stop it. He needs the doctor." "Let him wait," the deputy growls. "Doctor hour is over. He should have reported in the morning." The assistant deputy flares up. "What shall I tell him, Mr. Woods?" I ask. "Nothing. Get back to your cell." "Perhaps you better go up and take a look, Scott," the deputy suggests. Mr. Woods strides along the gallery, pauses a moment at 18C and returns. "Nothing much. A bit of blood. I ordered him to report on sick list in the morning." A middle-aged prisoner with confident bearing and polished manner enters from the yard. It is the French Count, one of the clerks in the front office.
"Good morning, gentlemen."
He greets the officers. He leans familiarly over the deputy's chair, remarking, "I've been hunting half an hour for you. The captain is a bit ruffled this morning. He is looking for you." The deputy hurriedly rises. "Where is he?" he asks anxiously. "In the office, Mr. Greaves. You know what's about?" "What? Quick now." "They caught Wild Bill right in the act, out in the yard there, back of the shed." The deputy stumps heavily out into the yard. "Who's the kid?" The assistant deputy inquires, an amused twinkle in his eye. "Bobby." "Who? That boy in the whitewash gang?" "Yes, Fatty Bobby." The clatter on the upper tier grows loud and violent. The sick man is striking his tin can on the bars and shaking the door. Woods hastens to C-18. "You stop that, you hear?" he commands angrily. "I'm sick. I want the doctor." "This isn't doctor hour. You'll see him in the morning." "I may be dead in the morning. I want him now." "You won't see him, that's all. You keep quiet there." Furiously, the prisoner raps on the door. The hall reverberates with hollow booming. The block captain returns to the desk, his face crimson. He whispers to the assistant deputy. The latter nods his head. Wood claps his hands, deliberately, slowly. 1, 2, 3. Guards hurriedly descend from the galleries and advance to the desk. The rangemen appear at their doors. "Everybody to his cell. Officers, lock him in," Woods commands. "You can stay here, Jasper," the assistant deputy remarks to the trustee. The rangemen step into their cells. The levers are pulled. The door is locked. I hear the tread of many feet on the third gallery. Now they cease, and all is quiet. "C-18, step out here." The door slams. There is noisy shuffling and stamping and the dull, heavy thuds of striking clubs. A loud cry and a moan. They drag the prisoner along the range and down the stairway. The rotunda door creaks and the clamour dies away. A few minutes elapse in silence. Now someone whispers through the pipes. Insane solitaries bark and crow. Loud coughing drowns the noises, and then the rotunda door opens with a plaintive screech. The rangemen are unlocked. I stand at the open door of my cell. The negro trustee dusts and brushes the officers, their backs and arms covered with whitewash, as if they had been rubbed against the wall. Their clothes cleaned and smoothed. The guards loll in the chairs and sit on the desk. They look somewhat ruffled and flustered. Jasper enlarges upon the piquant gossip. Wild Bill, notorious invert and protégé of the warden, he relates, had been hanging around the kids from the stocking shop. He has been after Fatty Bobby for quite a while, and he's forever pestering Lady Sally, and young Davis too. The guards are astir with curiosity. They ply the negro with questions. He responds eagerly, raises his voice, and gesticulates excitedly. There is merriment and laughter at the officer's desk. 6. Dinner hour is approaching. Officer Gerst, in charge of the kitchen squad, enters a cell house. Behind him, a score of prisoners carry large wooden tubs filled with steaming liquid. The negro trustee, his nostrils expanded and eyes glistening, sniffs the air and announces with a grin, "Duke's mixture for dinner today." The scene becomes animated at the front. Tables are noisily moved about. The tin plate rattles, and men talk and shout. With a large ladle the soup is dished out from the tubs, and the pans, bent and rusty, stacked up in long rows. The deputy warden flounces in, splutters some orders that remain ignored, and looks critically at the dinner pans. He produces a pocket knife and ambles along the tables, spearing a potato here, a bit of floating vegetable there. Guard Hughes, his inspection of the cells completed, saunters along, casting greedy eyes at the food. He hovers about, waiting for the deputy to leave. The latter stands, hands dug into his pockets, short legs wide apart, scraggy beard keeping time with the moving jaws. Guard Hughes winks at one of the kitchen men and slinks into an open cell. The prisoner fusses about, pretends to move the empty tubs out of the way, and then quickly snatches a pan of soup and passes it to the guard. Negro Jasper, alert and watchful, strolls by Woods, surreptitiously whispering. The officer walks to the open cell and surprises the guard, his head thrown back, the large pan covering his face. Woods smiles disdainfully. The prisoners giggle and chuckle. Chief Jim, the head cook, a Pittsburgh saloon-keeper serving 12 years for murder, promenades down the range. Large-bellied and white-capped, he wears an air of prosperity and independence. With swelling chest, stomach protruding, and hand wrapped in his dirty apron, the chief walks leisurely along the cells, nodding and exchanging greetings. He pauses at a door. It's cell 9A, the fat kid. Jim leans against the wall, his back toward the dinner tables. Presently his hand steals between the bars. Now and then he glances toward the front and steps closer to the door. He draws a large bundle from his bosom, hastily tears it open, and produces a piece of cooked meat, several raw onions, some cakes. One by one he passes the delicacies to the young prisoner, forcing them through the narrow openings between the bars. He lifts his apron, fans the door-sill, and carefully wipes the ironwork. Then he smiles, casts a searching look to the front, grips the bars with both hands, and vanishes into the deep niche. As suddenly he appears to view again, he takes several steps, then pauses at another cell. Standing away from the door, he speaks loudly and laughs boisterously, his hands fumbling beneath the apron. Soon he leaves, advancing to the dinner tables. He approaches the range man, lifts his eyebrows questioningly, and winks. The man nods affirmatively, and retreats into his cell. The chief dives into the bosom of his shirt and flings a bundle through the open door. He holds out his hand, whispering, 2 bits. Broke now? Be sure you pay me tomorrow. That steak there's worth a plunk. The gong tolls the dinner hour. The negro trustee snatches 2 pans and hastens away. The guards unlock the prisoners, excepting the men in solitary, who are deprived of the sole meal of the day. The line forms in single file and advances slowly to the tables. Then, pan in hand, the men circle the block to the centre, ascend the galleries, and are locked in their cells. The loud tempo of many feet marching in step sounds from the yard. The shop workers enter, receive the pan of soup, and walk to the cells. Some sniff the air, make a wry face, and pass on empty-handed. There is much suppressed murmuring and whispering. Gradually the sounds die away. It is the noon hour. Every prisoner is counted and locked in. Only the trustees are about. 7. The afternoon brings a breath of relief. Old Jimmy Mitchell, rough-spoken and kind, heads the second shift of officers, on duty from 1 till 9 p.m. The venerable captain of the block trudges past the cells, stroking his flowing white beard and profusely swearing at the men. But the prisoners love him. He frowns upon clubbing and discourages trouble-seeking guards. Head downward, he thumps heavily along the hall on his first round of the bottom ranges. Presently a voice hails him. "Oh, Mr. Mitchell, come here, please." "Damn your soul to hell," the officer rages. "Don't you know better than to bother me when I'm counting, eh? Shut up now. God damn you, you've mixed me all up." He returns to the front and begins to count again, pointing his finger at each occupied cell. This duty over, and his report filed, he returns to the offending prisoner. "What the hell do you want, Butch?" "Mr. Mitchell, my shoes are on the bum. I'm walking on my socks." "Where the devil do you think you're going anyhow, to a ball?" "Papa Mitchell, be good now, won't you?" the youth coaxes. "Go take a thump to yourself, will you?" The officer walks off, heavy-browed and thoughtful, but pauses a short distance from the cell to hear Butch mumbling discontentedly. The block captain retraces his steps, and facing the boy, storms at him. "What did you say? Damn the old skunk? That's what you said, eh? You come on out of there." With much show of violence, he inserts the key into the lock, pulls the door open with a bang, and hails a passing guard. "Mr. Kelly, quick, take this loafer out and give him a pair of shoes." He starts down the range when someone calls from an upper tier. Jimmy, come on up here." "Now, Jimmy, you damn carcass for you," the old man bellows angrily. "Where the hell are you?" "Here, I'm B, 20B, right over you." The officer steps back to the wall and looks up toward the second gallery. "What in the name of Jesus Christ do you want, Slim?" "Awful cramps in me stomach. Get me some cramp mixture, Jim."
Cramps in your head, that's what you got, you big bum, you. Where the hell do you get your cramp mixture when you was spilling around in a freight car, eh? I got booze then, the prisoner retorts. Like hell you did. You were damn lucky to get a lousy handout at the back door, you ornery pimple on God's good earth. The hell you say? A handout was a damn sight better than the rotten slush I get here. I wouldn't have a bellyache if it wasn't for the hogwash they gave us today. Lay down now, you talk like a horse's rosette.
It's the old man's favourite expression, in his rich vocabulary of picturesque metaphor and simile, but there is no sting in the brusque speech, no rancour in the scowling eyes. On the way to the desk he pauses to whisper to the block trustee, "John, you better run down to the dispensary and get that big stiff some cramp mixture." Happening to glance into a cell, Mitchell notices a new arrival, a bald-headed man, his back against the door.
"Hey, you!"
the block captain shouts at him, startling the green prisoner off his chair.
"Take that bald thing out of there, or I'll run you in for indecent exposure."
He chuckles at the man's fright, like a boy pleased with a naughty prank, and ascends the upper tiers. Duster in hand, I walk along the range. The guards are engaged on the galleries, examining cells, overseeing the moving of the newly graded inmates to the south wing, or chatting with the trustees. The chairs at the officer's desk are vacant. Keeping alert watch on the rotunda doors, I walk from cell to cell, whiling away the afternoon hours in conversation. Johnny, the friendly runner, loiters at the desk, now and then glancing into the yard and giving me the office by sharply snapping his fingers to warn me of danger. I ply the duster diligently, while the deputy and his assistants linger about, surrounded by the trustees imparting information gathered during the day. Gradually they disperse, called into a shop where a fight is in progress, or nosing about the kitchen and assiduously killing time. The coast is clear, and I return to pick up the thread of interrupted conversation. But the subjects of common interest are soon exhausted. The oft-repeated tirade against the rotten grub, the stale punk, and the hogwash, vehement cursing of the brutal screws, the stomach robber of a warden, and the unreliability of his promises, the exchange of gossip, and then back again to berating the food and the treatment. Within the narrow circle runs the interminable tale, coloured by individual temperament, intensified by the length of sentence. The whole is dominated by a deep sense of unmerited suffering and bitter resentment, often breathing dire vengeance against those whom they consider responsible for their misfortune, including the police, the prosecutor, the informer, the witnesses, and in rare instances, the trial judge. But as the longed-for release approaches, the note of hope and liberty rings clearer, stronger, with the swelling undercurrent of frank and irrepressible sex desire. End of Section 27. Recording by Stephen Harvey. Section 28 of Prison Memoirs of an Anarchist. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Prison Memoirs of an Anarchist by Alexander Berkman. Part 2, Chapter 21. The Deeds of the Good to the Evil. The new arrivals are forlorn and dejected, a look of fear and despair in their eyes. The long-timers among them seem dazed, as if with some terrible shock, and fall upon the bed in stupor-like sleep. The boys from the reformatories, some mere children in their teens, weep and moan and tremble at the officer's footstep. Only the repeaters and old-timers preserve their composure, scoff at the fresh fish, nod at old acquaintances, and exchange vulgar pleasantries with the guards. But all soon grow nervous and irritable, and stand at the door, leaning against the bars, an expression of bewildered hopelessness or anxious expectancy on their faces. They yearn for companionship, and are pathetically eager to talk, to hear the sound of a voice, to unbosom their heavy hearts. I am minutely familiar with every detail of their case, their life history, their hopes and fears. Through the endless weeks and months on the range, their tragedies are the sole subject of conversation. A glance into the mournful faces, pressed close against the bars, and the panorama of misery rises before me. The cell-house grows more desolate, bleaker, the air gloomier, and more depressing. There is Giuseppe, his bright eyes lighting up with a faint smile as I pause at his door. "Hello, Alec," he greets me in his sweet, sad voice. He knows me from the jail. His father and elder brother have been executed, and he commuted to life because of youth. He is barely 18, but his hair has turned white. He has been acting queerly of late. At night I often hear him muttering and walking incessantly and muttering. There is a peculiar look about his eyes, restless, roving. "Alec," he says suddenly, "me want to tell you something. You no tell nobody, yes?" Assured I'll keep his confidence, he begins to talk quickly, excitedly. "Nobody there, Alec? No screw? Shh! Last night me see my brother. Yes, see Gianni. Jesu Christu, me see my poor brother in the cellar here, and then me father he come. Brother and father, they stay there, on the floor, and so quiet, like a dead. And then they come and lay down in my bed. Oh, Jesu Christu, me so afraid, me cry and pray. You not know what it mean? No? Me tell you, it mean me die soon." His eyes glow with a sombre fire, a hectic flush on his face. He knits his brows, as I essay to calm him, and continues hurriedly, "Shh! Wait a me tell you all. You know what for my father and Gianni come out of the grave? Me tell you. They call it for revenge, 'cause they innocente. Me tell you truth. See, we all work in the mine, the coal mine. Me and my father and Gianni all work hard and make $1, maybe $1.25 a day. And bigger American man him come and bother my father. My father him no want a trouble. Him old man, no bother nobody. And the American man him make a $2 and maybe $2.50 a day. And him bother my father all the time, bother him and kick him to the legs, and steal my brother's shovel, and hide father's hat, and make a trouble for my countrymen, and call us dirty Dagos. And one day him and 2 Irish, they all drunk, and smash my father. An American man, an Irish holler, "Dago S.O.B., 'fraid of fight." And the American man him take a bigger pickaxe and wanna hit my father, and my father him run, and me and my brother and friend we fight, and American man him fall, and we all go way home. Then please come and arrest me and father and brother, and say we kill a American man. Me and my brother no use knife, maybe my friend do. Me no know, him no arresta, him go home in Italia. My father and brother they save $9 to $7, and me save 25, and got a layer. Him no good, and no talk much in court. We poor men, no can take case in other court, and father him hang, and Gianni hang, and me get life. My father and brother they come last night from the grave, 'cause they innocente and want a revenge, and me got a mek revenge. Me no rest, got a... The sharp snapping of Johnny the runner warns me of danger, and I hastily leave. The melancholy figures line the doors as I walk up and down the hall. The blanched faces peer wistfully through the bars, or lean dejectedly against the wall, a vacant stare in the dim eyes. Each calls to mind the stories of misery and distress, the scenes of brutality and torture I witness in the prison house. Like ghastly nightmares the shadows pass before me. There is silent Nick, restlessly pacing his cage, never ceasing, his lips sealed in brutish muteness. For 3 years he has not left the cell, nor uttered a word. The stolid features are cut and bleeding. Last night he had attempted suicide, and the guards beat him and left him unconscious on the floor. There is Crazy Hunky, the Austrian. Every morning, as the officer unlocks his door to hand in the loaf of bread, he makes a wild dash for the yard, shouting, "Me wife! Where's me wife?" He rushes toward the front and desperately grabs the door handle. The double iron gate is securely locked, a look of blank amazement on his face. He slowly returns to the cell. The guards await him with malicious smile. Suddenly they rush upon him, blackjacks in hand. "Me wife! Me seen her!" the Austrian cries. The blood gushing from his mouth and nose, they kick him into the cell. "Me wife waiting in the yard," he moans. In the next cell is Tommy Wellman. Adjoining him, Jim Grant. They are boys recently transferred from the reformatory. They cower in the corner, in terror of the scene. With tearful eyes they relate their story. Orphans in the slums of Allegheny, they have been sent to the reform school at Morganza for snatching fruit off a corner stand. Maltreated and beaten, they sought to escape. Childishly they set fire to the dormitory, almost in sight of the keepers. "I says to me chum, says I," Tommy narrates with boyish glee, "Kid, says I, let's fire the lousy joint. There'll be lots of fun, and we'll make our getaway in the excitement." They were taken to court, and the good judge sentenced them to 5 years to the penitentiary. "Glad to get out of that dump," Tommy comments. "It was just fierce. They paddled and starved us something terrible." In the basket cell, a young coloured man grovels on the floor. It is Lancaster, number 8523. He was serving 7 years and working every day in the mat shop. Slowly the days passed, and at last the longed-for hour of release arrived. But Lancaster was not discharged. He was kept at his task, the warden informing him that he had lost 6 months of his good time for defective work. The light-hearted negro grew sullen and morose. Often the silence of the cell-house was pierced by his anguished cry in the night, "My time's up! Time's up! I want to go home!" The guards would take him from the cell and place him in the dungeon. One morning, in a fit of frenzy, he attacked Captain McVeigh, the officer of the shop. The captain received a slight scratch on the neck, and Lancaster was kept chained to the wall of the dungeon for 10 days. He returned to the cell, a drivelling imbecile. The next day they dressed him in his citizen clothes, Lancaster mumbling, "Going home, going home." The warden and several officers accompanied him to court, on the way coaching the poor idiot to answer yes to the question, "Do you plead guilty?" He received 7 years, the extreme penalty of the law, for the attempted murder of a keeper. They brought him back to the prison and locked him up in a basket cell, the barred door covered with a wire screen that almost entirely excludes light and air. He receives no medical attention, and is fed on a bread and water diet. The witless negro crawls on the floor, unwashed and unkempt, scratching with his nails fantastic shapes on the stone and babbling stupidly, "Going, Jesus, going to Jerusalem. See, he rides the holy ass. He's going to his father's home. Going home, going home." As I pass he looks up, perplexed wonder on his face. His brows meet in a painful attempt to collect his wandering thoughts, and he drawls with pathetic sing-song, "Going home, Jesus going to Father's home." Guards raise their hands to their nostrils as they approach the cell. The poor imbecile evacuates on the table, the chair, and the floor. Twice a month he is taken to the bathroom. His clothes are stripped, and the hose is turned on the crazy negro. The cell of little Sammy is vacant. He was number 9521, a young man from Altoona. I knew him quite well. He was a kind boy and a diligent worker, but now and then he would fall into a fit of melancholy. He would then sit motionless on the chair, a blank stare on his face, neglecting food and work. These spells generally lasted 2 or 3 days, Sammy refusing to leave the cell. Old Jimmy McPain, the dead deputy, on such occasions commanded the prisoner to the shop, while Sammy sat and stared in a daze. McPain would order the stubborn kid to the dungeon, and every time Sammy got his head working, he was dragged, silent and motionless, to the cellar. The new deputy has followed the established practice, and last evening, at music hour, while the men were scraping their instruments, little Sammy was found on the floor of the cell, his throat hacked from ear to ear. At the coroner's inquest, the warden testified that the boy was considered mentally defective, that he was therefore excused from work and never punished. Returning to my cell in the evening, my gaze meets the printed rules on the wall. The prison authorities desire to treat every prisoner in their charge with humanity and kindness. The aim of all prison discipline is, by enforcing the law, to restrain the evil and to protect the innocent from further harm, to so apply the law upon the criminal as to produce a cure from his moral infirmities by calling out the better principles of his nature. End of Section 28. Recording by Stephen Harvey. Section 29 of Prison Memoirs of an Anarchist. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Prison Memoirs of an Anarchist by Alexander Berkman. Part 2, Chapter 22. The Grist of the Prison Mill. 1. The comparative freedom of the range familiarizes me with the workings of the institution and brings me in close contact with the authorities. The personnel of the guards is of very inferior character. I find their average intelligence considerably lower than that of the inmates. Especially does the element recruited from the police and the detective service lack sympathy with the unfortunates in their charge. They are mostly men discharged from city employment because of habitual drunkenness or flagrant brutality and corruption. Their attitude toward the prisoners is summed up in coercion and suppression. They look upon the men as will-less objects of iron-handed discipline, exact unquestioning obedience and absolute submissiveness to peremptory whims, and harbour personal animosity towards the less pliant. The more intelligent among the officers scorn inferior duties and crave advancement. The authority and remuneration of a deputy wardenship is alluring to them, and every keeper considers himself the fittest for the vacancy. But the coveted prize is awarded to the guard most feared by the inmates and most subservient to the warden, a direct incitement to brutality on the one hand, to sycophancy on the others. A number of the officers are veterans of the Civil War. Several among them had suffered incarceration in Libby prison. These often manifest a more sympathetic spirit. The great majority of the keepers, however, have been employed in the penitentiary from 15 to 25 years. Some even for a longer period, like Officer Stewart, who has been a guard for 40 years. This element is unspeakably callous and cruel. The prisoners discuss among themselves the ages of the old guards, and speculate on the days allotted them. The death of one of them is hailed with joy. Seldom they are discharged. Still more seldom do they resign. The appearance of a new officer sheds hope into the dismal lives. New guards, unless drafted from the police bureau, are almost without exception lenient and forbearing, often exceedingly humane. The inmates vie with each other in showing complaisance to the candidate. It is a point of honour in their unwritten ethics to treat him white. They frown upon the fellow convict who seeks to take advantage of the green screw by misusing his kindness, or exploiting his ignorance of the prison rules. But the older officers secretly resent the infusion of new blood. They strive to discourage the applicant by exaggerating the dangers of the position and depreciating its financial desirability for an ambitious young man. They impress upon him the warden's unfairness to the guards and the lack of opportunity for advancement. Often they dissuade the new man, and he disappears from the prison horizon. But if he persists in remaining, the old keepers expostulate with him in pretending friendliness upon his leniency, chide him for a soft-hearted tenderfoot, and improve every opportunity to initiate him into the practices of brutality. The system is known in the prison as breaking in. The new man is constantly drafted in the clubbing squad, the older officers setting the example of cruelty. Refusal to participate signifies insubordination to his superiors and the shirking of routine duty, and results in immediate discharge. But such instances are extremely rare. Within the memory of the oldest officer, Mr. Stewart, it happened only once, and the man was sickly. Slowly the poison is instilled into the new guard. Within a short time the prisoners notice the first signs of change. He grows less tolerant and chummy, more irritated and distant. Presently he feels himself the object of espionage by the favourite trustees of his fellow officers. In some mysterious manner the warden is aware of his every step, berating him for speaking unduly long to this prisoner, or for giving another half a banana, the remnant of his lunch. In a moment of commiseration and pity, the officer is moved by the tearful pleadings of misery to carry a message to the sick wife or child of a prisoner. The latter confides the secret to some friend, or carelessly brags of his intimacy with the guard, and soon the keeper faces the warden on charges, and is deprived of a month's pay. Repeated misplacement of confidence, occasional betrayal by a prisoner seeking the good graces of the warden, and the new officer grows embittered against the species convict. The instinct of self-preservation, harassed and menaced on every side, becomes more assertive, and the guard is soon drawn into the vortex of the system. 2. Daily I behold the machinery at work, grinding and pulverizing, brutalizing the officers, dehumanizing the inmates. Far removed from the strife and struggle of the larger world, I yet witness its miniature replica, more agonizing and merciless, within the walls. A perfected model it is, this prison life, with its apparent uniformity and dull passivity, but between the torpid surface smoulder the fires of being, now crackling faintly under a dun, smothering smoke, now blazing forth with the ruthlessness of despair. Hidden by the veil of discipline rages the struggle of fiercely contending wills, and intricate meshes are woven in the quagmire of darkness and suppression. Intrigue and counterplot, violence and corruption are rampant in cell house and shop. The prisoners spy upon each other, and in turn upon the officers. The latter encourages the trustees in unearthing the secret doings of the inmates, and the stools enviously compete with each other in supplying information to the keepers. Often they deliberately inveigle the trustful prisoner into a fake plot to escape, help and encourage him in the preparations, and at the critical moment denounce him to the authorities. The luckless man is severely punished, usually remaining in utter ignorance of the intrigue. The provocateur is rewarded with greater liberty and special privileges. Frequently his treachery proves the stepping stone to freedom, aided by the warden's official recommendation of the model prisoner to the State Board of Pardons. The stools and the trustees are an essential element in the government of the prison. With rare exception, every officer has one or more on his staff. They assist him in his duties, perform most of his work, and make out the reports for the illiterate guards. Occasionally they are even called upon to help the clubbing squad. The more intelligent stools enjoy the confidence of the deputy and his assistants, and thence advance to the favour of the warden. The latter places more reliance upon his favourite trustees than upon the guards. "I have about 100 paid officers to keep watch over the prisoners," the warden informs new applicant, "and 200 volunteers to watch both." The volunteers are vested with unofficial authority, often exceeding that of the inferior officers. They invariably secure the sinecures of the prison, involving little work and affording opportunity for espionage. They are runners, messengers, yard and office men. Other desirable positions, clerkships and the like, are awarded to influential prisoners, such as bankers, embezzlers, and boodlers. These are known in the institution as holding political jobs. Together with the stools, they are scorned by the initiated prisoners as the pets. The professional craftiness of the conman stands him in good stead in the prison. A shrewd judge of human nature, quick-witted and self-confident, he applies the practised cunning of his vocation to secure whatever privileges and perquisites the institution affords. His evident intelligence and aplomb powerfully impress the guards. His well-affected deference to authority flatters them. They are awed by his wonderful facility of expression and great attainments in the mysterious world of baccarat and confidence games. At heart they envy the high priest of easy money, and are proud to befriend him in his need. The officers exert themselves to please him, secure light work for him, and surreptitiously favour him with delicacies, and even money. His game is won. The con has now secured the friendship and confidence of his keepers, and will continue to exploit them by pretended warm interest in their physical complaints, their family troubles, and their whispered ambition of promotion and fear of the warden's discrimination. The more intelligent officers are the easiest victims of his wiles, but even the higher officials, more difficult to approach, do not escape the confidence man. His business has perfected his sense of orientation. He quickly rends the veil of appearance and scans the undercurrents. He frets at his imprisonment and hints at high social connections. His real identity is a great secret. He wishes to save his wealthy relatives from public disgrace. A careless slip of the tongue betrays his college education. With a deprecating nod he confesses that his father is a state senator. He is the only black sheep in his family, yet they are good to him, and will not disown him, but he must not bring notoriety upon them. Eager for special privileges and the liberty of the trustees, or fearful of punishment, the con-man matures his campaign. He writes a note to a fellow prisoner. With much detail and thorough knowledge of prison conditions, he exposes all the ins and outs of the institution. In elegant English he criticizes the management, dwells upon the ignorance and brutality of the guards, and charges the warden and the board of prison inspectors with graft, individually and collectively. He denounces the warden as a stomach robber of poor unfortunates. The counties pay from 25 to 30 cents per day for each inmate. The federal government, for its quota of men, 50 cents per person. Why are the prisoners given qualitatively and quantitatively inadequate food, he demands. Does not the state appropriate thousands of dollars for the support of the penitentiary, beside the money received from the counties? With keen scalpel the con-man dissects the anatomy of the institution. One by one he analyzes the industries, showing the most intimate knowledge. The hosiery department produces so and so many dozens of stockings per day. They are not stamped convict-made, as the law requires. The labels attached are misleading, and calculated to decoy the innocent buyer. The character of the product in the several mat shops is similarly an infraction of the statutes of the great state of Pennsylvania for the protection of free labor. The broom shop is leased by contract to a firm of manufacturers known as Lang Brothers. The law expressly forbids contract labour in prisons. The stamp "convict made" on the brooms is pasted over with a label, concealing the source of manufacture. Thus the conman runs on in his note. With much show of secrecy he entrusts it to a notorious stool for delivery to a friend. Soon the writer is called before the warden. In the latter's hands is the note. The offender smiles complacently. He is aware the authorities are terrorized by the disclosure of such intimate familiarity with the secrets of the prison house in the possession of an intelligent, possibly well-connected man. He must be propitiated at all cost. The conman joins the politicians. The ingenuity of imprisoned intelligence treads devious paths, all leading to the highway of enlarged liberty and privilege. The old-timer, veteran of oft-repeated experience, easily avoids hard labour. He has many friends in the prison, is familiar with the keepers, and is welcomed by them like a prodigal coming home. The officers are glad to renew the old acquaintance and talk over old times. It brings interest into their tedious existence, often as grey and monotonous as the prisoners. The seasoned yeggman, constitutionally and on principle opposed to toil, rarely works. Generally suffering a comparatively short sentence, he looks upon his imprisonment as, in a measure, a rest cure from the wear and tear of tramp life. Above average intelligence, he scorns work in general, prison labour in particular. He avoids it with unstinted expense of energy and effort. As a last resort he plays the jigger card, producing an artificial wound on leg or arm having every appearance of syphilitic excrescence. He pretends to be frightened by the infection, and prevails upon the physician to examine him. The doctor wonders at the wound, closely resembling the dreaded disease. "Ever had syphilis?" he demands. The prisoner protests indignantly. "Perhaps in the family," the medicus suggests. The patient looks diffident, blushes, cries, "No, never," and assumes a guilty look. The doctor is now convinced the prisoner is a victim of syphilis. The man is excused from work indefinitely. The wily yegg, now a patient, secures a snap in the yard, and adapts prison conditions to his habits of life. He sedulously courts the friendship of some young inmate, and wins his admiration by ghost stories of great daring and cunning. He puts the boy next to the ropes, and constitutes himself his protector against the abuse of the guards and the advances of other prisoners. He guides the youth's steps through the maze of conflicting rules, and finally initiates him into the higher wisdom of the road. The path of the gun is smoothed by his colleagues in the prison. Even before his arrival, the esprit de corps of the profession is at work, securing a soft berth for the expected friend. If noted for success and skill, he enjoys the respect of the officers and the admiration of a retinue of aspiring young crooks of lesser experience and reputation. With conscious superiority he instructs them in the finesse of his trade, practices them in nimble-fingered touches, and imbues them with the philosophy of the plenitude of succours whom the good God has put upon the earth to afford the thief an honest living. His sentence nearing completion, the gun grows thoughtful, carefully scans the papers, forms plans for his first job, arranges dates with his partners, and gathers messages for their mall buzzers, women thieves. He is gravely concerned with the somewhat roughened condition of his hands, and the possible dulling of his sensitive fingers. He manoeuvres, generally successfully, for lighter work, to limber up a bit, jollies the officers, and cajoles the warden for new shoes, made to measure in the local shops, and insists on the $10 allowance to prisoners received from counties outside of Allegheny. Upon their discharge, prisoners tried and convicted in the county of Allegheny, in which the Western Penitentiary is located, receive only $5. He argues the need of money to leave the state. Often he does leave. More frequently, a number of charges against the man are held in reserve by the police, and he is arrested at the gate by detectives who have been previously notified by the prison authorities. The great bulk of the inmates, accidental and occasional offenders direct from the field, factory, and mine, plod along in the shops in sullen misery and dread. Day in, day out, year after year, they drudge at the monotonous work, dully wondering at the numerous trustees idling about, while their own heavy tasks are constantly increased. From cell to shop and back again, always under the stern eyes of the guards, their days drag in deadening toil. In mute bewilderment, they receive contradictory orders, unaware of the secret antagonisms between the officials. They are surprised at the new rule making attendance at religious service obligatory, and again at the succeeding order, the desired appropriation for a new chapel having been secured, making church-going optional. They are astonished at the sudden disappearance of the considerate and gentle guard Byers, and anxiously hope for his return, not knowing that the officer who discouraged the underhand methods of the trustees fell a victim to their cabal. 3. Occasionally a bolder spirit grumbles at the exasperating partiality. Released from punishment, he patiently awaits an opportunity to complain to the warden of his unjust treatment. Weeks pass. At last the captain visits the shop. A propitious moment. The carefully trimmed beard frames the stern face in benevolent white, mellowing the hard features and lending dignity to his appearance. His eyes brighten with peculiar brilliancy as he slowly begins to stroke his chin, and then, almost imperceptibly, presses his fingers to his lips. As he passes through the shop, the prisoner raises his hand. "What is it?" the warden inquires, a pleasant smile on his face. The man relates his grievance with nervous eagerness. "Oh, well," the captain claps him on the shoulder, "perhaps a mistake, an unfortunate mistake, but then you might have done something at another time and not been punished." He laughs merrily at his witticism. "It is so long ago, anyhow, we'll forget it." And he passes on. But if the captain is in a different mood, his features harden, the stern eyes scowl, and he says in his clear, sharp tones, "State your grievance in writing, on the printed slip which the officer will give you." The written complaint, deposited in the mailbox, finally reaches the chaplain, and is forwarded by him to the warden's office. There the deputy and the assistant deputy read and classify the slips, placing some on the captain's file, and throwing others into the waste-basket, according as the accusation is directed against a friendly or an unfriendly brother officer. Months pass before the prisoner is called for a hearing. By that time he very likely has a more serious charge against the guard who now persecutes the kicker, but the new complaint has not yet been filed, and therefore the hearing is postponed. Not infrequently, men are called for a hearing who have been discharged or died since making the complaint. The persevering prisoner, however, unable to receive satisfaction from the warden, sends a written complaint to some member of the highest authority in the penitentiary, the Board of Inspectors. These are supposed to meet monthly to consider the affairs of the institution, visit the inmates, and minister to their moral needs. The complainant waits, mails several more slips, and wonders why he receives no audience with the inspectors, but the latter remain invisible, some not visiting the penitentiary within a year. Only the secretary of the board, Mr. Reed, a wealthy jeweller of Pittsburgh, occasionally puts in an appearance. Tall and lean, immaculate and trim, he exhales an atmosphere of sanctimoniousness. He walks leisurely through the block, passes a cell with a lithograph of Christ on the wall, and pauses, his hands folded, his eyes turned upwards, lips slightly parted in silent prayer. He inquires of the rangeman, "Whose cell is this?" "A1108, Mr. Reed," the prisoner informs him. It is the cell of Jasper, the coloured trustee, chief stool of the prison. "He is a good man, God bless him," the inspector says, a quaver in his voice. He steps into the cell, puts on his gloves, and carefully adjusts the little looking-glass and the rules hanging awry on the wall. "It offends my eye," he smiles at the attending rangeman. "They don't hang straight." Young Tommy, in the adjoining cell, calls out, "Mr. Officer, please." The inspector steps forward. "This is Inspector Reed," he corrects the boy. "What is it you wish?" "Oh, Mr. Inspector, I've been asking to see you a long time. I wanted—" "You should have sent me a slip. Have you a copy of the rules in the cell, my man?" "Yes, sir." "Can you read?" "No, sir." "Poor boy, did you never go to school?" "No, sir, me mother died when I was a kid. They put me into orphan and then into ref." "And your father?" "I had no father. Mother always said he ran away before I was born." "They have schools in the orphan asylum, also in the reformatory, I believe." "Yep, but they keep me most of the time in punishment. I didn't care for the school nohow." "You're a bad boy. How old are you now?" 17. "What is your name?" "Tommy Wellman." "From Pittsburgh?" "Allegheny. Me mother used to live on the hill near this here dump." "What did you wish to see me about?" "I can't stand the cell, Mr. Inspector. Please let me have some work." "Are you locked up for a cause?" "I smashed a guy in the jaw for calling me names." "Don't you know it's wrong to fight, my little man?"
He said me mother was a bitch, God damn his... Don't swear. Never take the holy name in vain. It is a great sin. You should have reported the man to your officer, instead of fighting. I ain't no snitch. Will you get me out of the cell, Mr. Inspector? You are in the hands of the warden. He is very kind, and he will do what is best for you. Oh, hell, I'm locked up 5 months now. That's the best he's doing for me. Don't talk like that to me, the inspector upbraids him severely. You are a bad boy. You must pray. The good Lord will take care of you. You get out of here! The boy bursts out in sudden fury, cursing and swearing. Mr. Reed hurriedly steps back, his face momentarily paling, turns red with shame and anger. He motions to the captain of the block. Mr. Woods, report this man for impudence to an inspector, he orders, stalking out into the yard. The boy is removed to the dungeon. Oppressed and weary with the scenes of misery and torture, I welcome the relief of solitude as I am locked in the cell for the night. 4. Reading and study occupy the hours of the evening. I spend considerable time corresponding with Nold and Bauer. Our letters are bulky, 10, 15, and 20 pages long. There is so much to say. We discuss events in the world at large, incidents of the local life, the maltreatment of the inmates, the frequent clubbings and suicides, the unwholesome food. I share with my comrades my experiences on the range. They, in turn, keep me informed of occurrences in the shops. Their paths run smoother, less eventful than mine, yet not without much heartache and bitterness of spirit. They, too, are objects of prejudice and persecution. The officer of the shop where Nold is employed has been severely reprimanded for neglect of duty. The warden had noticed Carl, in the company of several other prisoners, passing through the yard with a load of mattings. He ordered the guard never to allow Nold out of his sight. Bauer has also felt the hand of petty tyranny. He has been deprived of his dark clothes and reduced to the stripes for disrespectful behaviour. Now he is removed to the north wing, where my cell is also located, while Nold is in the south wing, in a double cell, enjoying the luxury of a window. Fortunately, though, our friend, the horse thief, is still coffee boy on Bauer's range, thus enabling me to reach the big German. The latter, after reading my notes, returns them to our trusted carrier, who works in the same shop with Carl. Our mail connections are therefore complete, each of us exercising utmost care not to be trapped during the frequent surprises of searching ourselves and persons. Again, the prison blossoms is revived. Most of the readers of the previous year, however, are missing. Dempsey and Beatty, the Knights of Labour men, have been pardoned, thanks to the multiplied and conflicting confessions of the informer Gallagher, who still remains in prison. D., our poet laureate, has also been released, his short term having expired. His identity remains a mystery, he having merely hinted that he was a scientist of the old school, an alchemist, from which we inferred that he was a counterfeiter. Gradually we recruit our reading public from the more intelligent and trustworthy element. The De Queen strikers renew their subscriptions by contributing paper material. With them join Frank Shea, the philosophic second-story man, George, the prison librarian, Billy Ryan, professional gambler and confidence man, Yale, a specialist in the art of safe-blowing and former university student, the Attorney General, a sharp lawyer, Magazine Alvin, writer and novelist, Jim, from whose ingenuity no lock is secure, and others. M and K act as alternate editors, the rest as contributors. The several departments of the little magazinelet are ornamented with pen and ink drawings, one picturing Dante visiting the Inferno, another sketching a peat man with mask and dark lantern in the act of boring a safe, while a third bears the inscription, "I sometimes hold it half a sin to put in words the grief I feel, for words, like nature, half reveal and half conceal the soul within." The editorials are short, pithy comments on local events, interspersed with humorous sketches and caricatures of the officials. The balance of the blossoms consists of articles and essays of a more serious character, embracing religion and philosophy, labour and politics, with now and then a personal reminiscence by the second-story man, or some sex experience by Magazine Alvin. One of the associate editors lampoons Billy Goat Benny, the deputy warden. K sketches the shop screw and the trusted prisoner, and G relates the story of the recent strike in his shop, the men's demand for clear pump water instead of the liquid mud tapped from the river, and the breaking of the strike by the exile of a score of rioters to the dungeon. In the next issue, the incident is paralleled with the Pullman car strike, and the punished prisoners eulogized for their courageous stand.
someone dedicating an ultra-original poem to the noble sons of Eugene Debs. But the vicissitudes of our existence, the change of location of several readers, the illness and death of 2 contributors, badly disarranged the route. During the winter, Kay produces a little booklet of German poems, while I elaborate the short Story of Luba, written the previous year, into a novelette, dealing with life in New York and revolutionary circles. Presently, G suggests that the manuscripts might prove of interest to a larger public, and should be preserved. We discuss the unique plan, wondering how the intellectual contraband could be smuggled into the light of day. In our perplexity, we finally take counsel with Bob, the faithful commissary. He cuts the Gordian knot with astonishing levity. "Yous fellows just go ahead and write, and don't bother about nothing. Think I can walk off all right with a team of horses, but ain't got brains enough to get away with a bit of scribbling, eh? Just leave that to the horse thief, and write till you bust the paperwork, see?" Thus encouraged, with entire confidence in our resourceful friend, we give the matter serious thought, and before long we form the ambitious project of publishing a book by M.K.G. In high elation, with new interest in life, we set to work. The little magazine is suspended, and we devote all our spare time, as well as every available scrap of writing material, to the larger purpose. We decide to honor the approaching day, so pregnant with revolutionary inspiration, and as the sun bursts in brilliant splendor on the eastern skies, the 1st of May, 1895, he steals a blushing beam upon the heading of the first chapter, The Homestead Strike. End of Section 29. Recording by Stephen Harvey. Section 30 of Prison Memoirs of an Anarchist. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Prison Memoirs of an Anarchist by Alexander Berkman, Part 2, Chapter 23, The Scales of Justice. 1. The summer fades into days of dull grey. The fog thickens on the Ohio. The prison house is dim and damp. The river sirens sound sharp and shrill, and the cells echo with coughing and wheezing. The sick line stretches longer, the men looking more forlorn and dejected. The prisoner in charge of Tier K suffers a hemorrhage and is carried to the hospital. From assistant, I am advanced to his position on the range. But one morning the levers are pulled, the cells unlocked, and the men fed while I remain under key. I wonder at the peculiar oversight, and rap on the bars for the officers. The block captain orders me to desist. I request to see the warden, but am gruffly told that he cannot be disturbed in the morning. In vain I rack my brain to fathom the cause of my punishment. I review the incidents of the past weeks, ponder over each detail, but the mystery remains unsolved. Perhaps I have unwittingly offended some trustee, or I may be the object of the secret enmity of a spy. The chaplain, on his daily rounds, hands me a letter from the girl, and glances in surprise at the closed door. "Not feeling well, my boy?" he asks. "I'm locked up, chaplain." "What have you done?" "Nothing that I know of." "Oh, well, you'll be out soon. Don't fret, my boy." But the days pass, and I remain in the cell. The guards look worried, and vent their ill humour in profuse vulgarity. The deputy tries to appear mysterious, wobbles comically along the range, and splutters at me. "Nothing. Stay where you are." Jasper, the coloured trustee, flits up and down the hall, tremendously busy, his black face more lustrous than ever. Numerous stools nose about the galleries, stop here and there in confidential conversation with officers and prisoners, and whisper excitedly at the front desk. Assistant Deputy Hopkins goes in and out of the block, repeatedly calls Jasper to the office, and hovers in the neighbourhood of my cell. The rangemen talk in suppressed tones. An air of mystery pervades the cell-house. Finally, I am called to the warden. With unconcealed annoyance he demands, "What did you want?" The officers locked me up. "Who said you're locked up?" he interrupts angrily. "You're merely locked in." "Where's the difference?" I ask. "One is locked up for cause. You're just kept in for the present." "On what charge?" "No charge. None whatever. Take him back, officers." Close confinement becomes increasingly more dismal and dreary. By contrast with the spacious hall, the cell grows smaller and narrower, oppressing me with a sense of suffocation. My sudden isolation remains unexplained. Notwithstanding the chaplain's promise to intercede in my behalf, I remain locked in, and again return the days of solitary, with all their gloom and anguish of heart. 2. A ray of light is shed from New York. The girl writes in a hopeful vein about the progress of the movement and the intense interest in my case among radical circles. She refers to Comrade Merlino, now on a tour of agitation, and is enthusiastic about the favourable Labour sentiment toward me, manifested in the cities he had visited. Finally, she informs me of a plan on foot to secure a reduction of my sentence and the promising outlook for the collection of the necessary funds. From Merlino I receive a sum of money already contributed for the purpose, together with a letter of appreciation and encouragement, concluding, "Good cheer, dear comrade, the last word has not yet been spoken." My mind dwells among my friends. The breath from the world of the living fans the smouldering fires of longing. The tone of my comrades reverberates in my heart with trembling hope, but the revision of my sentence involves recourse to the courts. The sudden realization fills me with dismay. I cannot be guilty of a sacrifice of principle to gain freedom. The mere suggestion rouses the violent protest of my revolutionary traditions. In bitterness of soul, I resent my friends' ill-advised waking of the shades. I shall never leave the house of death. And yet, mail from my friends, full of expectation and confidence, arrives more frequently. Prominent lawyers have been consulted. Their unanimous opinion augurs well. The multiplication of my sentences was illegal. According to the statutes of Pennsylvania, the maximum penalty should not have exceeded 7 years. The Supreme Court would undoubtedly reverse the judgment of the lower tribunal, specifically the conviction on charges not constituting a crime under the laws of the state, and so forth. I am assailed by doubts. Is it consequent in me to decline liberty apparently within reach? John Most appealed his case to the Supreme Court, and the girl also took advantage of a legal defense. Considerable propaganda resulted from it. Should I refuse the opportunity which would offer such a splendid field for agitation? Would it not be folly to afford the enemy the triumph of my gradual annihilation? I would without hesitation reject freedom at the price of my convictions, but it involves no denial of my faith to rob the vampire of its prey. We must, if necessary, fight the beast of oppression with its own methods, scourge the law with its own tracks, as it were. Of course, the Supreme Court is but another weapon in the hands of authority, a pretence of impartial right. It decided against Most, sustaining the prejudiced verdict of the trial jury. They may do the same in my case, but that very circumstance will serve to confirm our arraignment of class justice. I shall therefore endorse the efforts of my friends. But before long I am informed that an application to the higher court is not permitted. The attorneys, upon examination of the records of the trial, discovered a fatal obstacle, they said. The defendant, not being legally represented, neglected to take exceptions to the rulings of the court prejudicial to the accused. Because of the technical omission, there exists no basis for an appeal. They therefore advise an application to the Board of Pardons on the ground that the punishment in my case is excessive. They are confident that the Board will act favourably, in view of the obvious unconstitutionality of the compounded sentences, the 5 minor indictments being indispensable parts of the major charge, and as such not constituting separate offerings. The unexpected development disquiets me. The sound of pardon is detestable. What bitter irony that the noblest intentions, the most unselfish motives, need seek pardon. Aye, of the very source that misinterprets and perverts them. For days the implied humiliation keeps agitating me. I recoil from the thought of personally affixing my name to the meek supplication of the printed form, and finally decide to refuse. An accidental conversation with the Attorney General disturbs my resolution. I learn that in Pennsylvania the applicant's signature is not required by the Pardon Board. A sense of guilty hope steals over me. Yet, I reflect, the pardon of the Chicago anarchists had contributed much to the dissemination of our ideas. The impartial analysis of the trial evidence by Governor Altgeld completely exonerated our comrades from responsibility for the Haymarket tragedy, and exposed the heinous conspiracy to destroy the most devoted and able representatives of the labor movement. May not a similar purpose be served by my application for a pardon? I write to my comrades, signifying my consent. We arrange for a personal interview to discuss the details of the work. Unfortunately, the girl, a persona non grata, cannot visit me. But a mutual friend, Miss Garrison, is to call on me within 2 months. At my request, the chaplain forwards to her the necessary permission, and I impatiently await the first friendly face in 2 years. 3. As unaccountably as my punishment in the solitary comes the relief at the expiration of 3 weeks. The K hall boy is still in the hospital, and I resume the duties of rangeman. The guards eye me with suspicion and greater vigilance, but I soon unravel the tangled skein, and learn the details of the abortive escape that caused my temporary retirement. The lock of my neighbour Johnny Smith had been tampered with. The youth, in solitary at the time, necessarily had the aid of another, it being impossible to reach the keyhole from the inside of the cell. The suspicion of the warden centred upon me, but investigation by the stools discovered the men actually concerned, and Dutch Adams, Spencer, Smith, and Jim Grant were chastised in the dungeon, and are now locked up for cause on my range. By degrees Johnny confides to me the true story of the frustrated plan. Dutch, a repeater serving his fifth bit and favourite of Hopkins, procured a piece of old iron and had it fashioned into a key in the machine shop where he was employed. He entrusted the rude instrument to Grant, a young reformatory boy, for a preliminary trial. The guileless youth easily walked into the trap, and the makeshift key was broken in the lock, with disastrous results. The tricked boys now swear vengeance upon the provocateur, but Dutch is missing from the range. He has been removed to an upper gallery, and is assigned to a coveted position in the shops. The newspapers print vivid stories of the desperate attempt to escape from Riverside, and compliment Captain Wright and the officers for so successfully protecting the community. The warden is deeply affected, and orders the additional punishment of the offenders with a bread-and-water diet. The deputy walks with inflated chest. Hopkins issues orders curtailing the privileges of the inmates, and inflicting greater hardships. The tone of the guards sounds haughtier, more peremptory. Jasper's face wears a blissful smile. The trustees look pleased and cheerful, but sullen gloom shrouds the prison. 4. I am standing at my cell when the door of the rotunda slowly opens and the warden approaches me. "A lady just called, Miss Garrison, from New York. Do you know her?" "She is one of my friends. I dismissed her. You can't see her." "Why? The rules entitle me to a visit every 3 months. I have had none in 2 years. I want to see her." "You can't. She needs a permit." "The chaplain sent her one at my request. A member of the Board of Inspectors rescinded it by telegraph." "What inspector?" "You can't question me. Your visitor has been refused admittance." "Will you tell me the reason, Warden?" "No reason whatever." He turns on his heel when I detain him. "Warden, it's 2 years since I've been in the dungeon. I am in the 1st grade now." I point to the recently earned dark suit. "I am entitled to all the privileges. Why am I deprived of visits?" "Not another word." He disappears through the yard door. From the galleries I hear the jeering of a trustee. A guard nearby brings his thumb to his nose and wriggles his fingers in my direction. Humiliated and angry, I return to the cell to find the monthly letter sheet on my table. I pour out all the bitterness of my heart to the girl, dwell on the warden's discrimination against me, and repeat our conversation and his refusal to admit my visitor. In conclusion, I direct her to have a Pittsburgh lawyer apply to the courts, to force the prison authorities to restore to me the privileges allowed by the law to the ordinary prisoner. I drop the letter in the mailbox, hoping that my outburst and the threat of the law will induce the warden to retreat from his position. The girl will, of course, understand the significance of the epistle, aware that my reference to a court process is a diplomatic subterfuge for effect, and not meant to be acted upon. But the next day the chaplain returns the letter to me. "Not so rash, my boy," he warns me not unkindly. "Be patient. I'll see what I can do for you." "But the letter, chaplain." "You've wasted your paper, Alec. I can't pass this letter. But just keep quiet, and I'll look into the matter." Weeks pass in evasive replies. Finally the chaplain advises a personal interview with the warden. The latter refers me to the inspectors. To each member of the board I address a request for a few minutes' conversation, but a month goes by without a word from the high officials. The friendly runner Southside Johnny offers to give me an opportunity to speak to an inspector on the payment of 10 plugs of tobacco. Unfortunately, I cannot spare my small allowance, but I tender him a $1 bill of the money the girl sent me, artfully concealed in the buckle of a pair of suspenders. The runner is highly elated, and assures me of success, directing me to keep careful watch on the yard door. Several days later, passing along the range, engaged in my duties, I notice Southside entering from the yard, in friendly conversation with a strange gentleman in citizen clothes. For a moment I do not realize the situation, but the next instant I am aware of Johnny's violent efforts to attract my attention. He pretends to show the man some fancy work made by the inmates, all the while drawing him closer to my door, with surreptitious nods at me. I approach my cell. "This is Berkman, Mr. Nevin, the man who shot Frick," Johnny remarks. The gentleman turns to me with a look of interest. "Good morning, Berkman," he says pleasantly. "How long are you doing?" 22 years. "I'm sorry to hear that. It's rather a long sentence. You know who I am?" "Inspector Nevin, I believe." "Yes. You have never seen me before?" "No, I sent a request to see you recently." When was that?
A month ago.
Strange. I was in the office 3 weeks ago. There was no note from you on my file. Are you sure you sent one? Quite sure. I sent a request to each inspector. What's the trouble? I inform him briefly that I have been deprived of visiting privileges. Somewhat surprised, he glances at my dark clothes and remarks, "You are in the first grade, and therefore entitled to visits. When did you have your last visitor?" 2 years ago. 2 years? He asks, almost incredulously. Did the lady from New York have a permit? The warden hurriedly enters from the yard. "Mr. Nevin," he calls out anxiously, "I've been looking for you." "Berkman was just telling me about his visitor being sent away, Captain," the inspector remarks. "Yes, yes," the warden smiles forcedly. "For cause." "Oh." The face of Mr. Nevin assumes a grave look. "Berkman," he turns to me, "you'll have to apply to the secretary of the board, Mr. Reed. I am not familiar with the internal affairs." The warden links his arm with the inspector, and they walk toward the yard door. At the entrance they are met by Dutch, Adams, the shop messenger. "Good morning, Mr. Nevin," the trustee greets him. "Won't you issue me a special visit? My mother is sick. She wants to see me." The warden grins at the ready fiction. "When did you have your last visit?" the inspector inquires. 2 weeks ago." "You are entitled to one only every 3 months."
"That is why I asked you for an extra, Mr. Inspector," Dutch reports boldly. "I know you are a kind man."
Mr. Nevin smiles good-naturedly and glances at the warden. "Dutch is all right." The captain nods. The inspector draws his visiting card, pencils on it, and hands it to the prisoner. End of Section 30. Recording by Stephen Harvey.